Um, Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Committee of the Whole, February 4th. I'd like to start out by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Saanich people. So I'd like to begin by calling the meeting to order. And committee, you have the agenda in front of you, and we've got one late item to add to the agenda.
Move as amended.
Okay, and do I have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. The agenda tonight is essentially entirely presentations. This is on our financial plan. And we have two public participation periods, one before the presentations and one after the presentations. And I guess the idea is if you have some comments about the budget, you know, if you've read all the materials or you have some things you want to say, maybe you'd make your suggestions in the first public participation period. The second one, you might be reacting to some of the things you heard. Maybe you have some questions, you want to clarify things. So I'd like to begin with our first public participation period. And if you're interested in speaking, I'd ask you to come up to the microphone, hit the button to turn the microphone on, and give us your name and address. So would anyone like to speak? For a second time, does anyone have any comments they'd like to make?
Good evening, David Carvely, 9655 First Street. Just a couple of kick-off comments, if I may. I actually feel some, I won't say sympathy, but empathy with this council because when I read through the documentation here, I realise that you've got two clashing waves. You've got, first of all, a new council and everybody rushing in to, while you're unsuspecting, throw some demands for money or requests for money to you before you've had time to fully get your minds around what's going on. I do sympathise with that. You're getting that. You're also getting, from what I understand, the opposite wave, which is that the previous council, very fortunate, were able to take advantage of things like gas tax, which is now expired, and which was funding the typically 3% a year that is used for project work, for capital expenses. So you're squished between the two of these things, a lack of funding on one side, or what has been funding on one side, and requests for funding that have come flooding in. As an initial comment, and I'll come back after the presentations, but when I look at 5.95, call it 6%, that's a lot, and something's got to give. I only would say that my suggestion would be that you have, each one of you, when you were elected, committed to an OCP review. An OCP review is going to be over the next year, and an OCP review is going to fix things for quite a long time. I would merely ask that please, when you listen to all of these requests, don't lock yourselves in. Many times it can be done that we just think a bit shorter term. When people are asking for 1 or 2 years, think maybe that there are specific projects, urgent things that need to be done. Otherwise, keep the budget in your hands if you're going to pass it, and then think about it later when we've had a chance to get the input from everybody for that OCP review. That's my initial comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? So third and final call. Seeing no one, we'll move on then to item number 4BI. And we have a presentation by South Island Prosperity Project and Emily Rosenroll, the CEO, and I guess your team. So, please, yeah.
Thank you.
And if you could just push the button on the microphone, so that, great.
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for your time.
It's our pleasure to be here today. I'm the CEO of the South Island Prosperity Project, Emily DeRosenroll, and I have a few members of my team here I'll just point out as well. Jack Van Kampen, Director of Innovation, Dallas Gislason, Director of Economic Development, and also in the back, Craig Norris, our Chair, and Bruce Williams, Director of Engagement. Bruce Williams will also be taking over, you can probably tell. I'm due in 5 weeks, so in 4 weeks, Bruce Williams will be interim CEO, and you'll see more of him. So I'll carry on. Here, I just want to tell you a little bit first about SIP, because of course there's some new members of council. We are a public-private organization. We are founded by originally 27 members. Now that's grown to 50 members. It's really not an organization that will grow in terms of membership that much more because it's really about the specific types of members that we have. So we're representing 10 of the local governments as well as 7 First Nation communities, 7 nonprofits, industry and business associations, the 3 post-secondary institutions, and 21 of the largest employers of the region. So these are some of them here, but you can see that goes on for 3 slides. The main reason that we're around, of course, economic development is a vast field. It's kind of like saying I do science. You know, what part of it do you do? There's lots of players, of course, in economic development. Some very good ones locally, for example, the EDC. But our major focus, of course, is regional. So it's really about having those partnerships in place so that we can take advantage of some of the opportunities that aren't available to us as individual units alone. And the main reason to sort of say why are we diversifying and why are we thinking about the next 10 years of our economy is for one simple reason. So the kids can come home for dinner on Sunday nights. And that really just helps us focus our energy. We're really talking about building the next generation of jobs. We're talking about creating a sustainable economy so that we can not have to go visit our kids in Toronto, because no one wants to do that, right? Just to very quickly, a snapshot of our history here. The region back in 2016, where this momentum was built to create the South Island Prosperity Project, the region was actually, Greater Victoria South Island, was one of the slowest to recover from the recession. And so, particularly coming out of the private sector, people start to say, well, why is that? And we found that not only was the region not rebounding, but as we dug deeper, we saw there were some systemic issues. For example, 85% of UVic students, you might not know this, are not actually staying here. And of course, that has everything to do with not having the kind of quality of jobs and the diversity to be able to produce sort of long-term interesting careers that would allow our graduates to say, I'm not going to move to a bigger metropolitan region. I can stay right here and build my future. So that's some of it. The bottom line is that our economy is still overly dependent on a few sectors. It's not diversified enough. So government and tourism tend to be sort of majorly still represented in our economy, even though BC in general for the country is actually highly diversified, but we're not here, and that is a problem. So this new approach to economic development is a collaborative model. It's a model that you'll see we're getting international and national attention for, and you should be proud of that as the founders. I believe there's unanimous support at this council for this model. So the regional leaders looked at this and said, there are things that we're not doing, there's investments we're not making to bring together this sort of regional fabric. So we were incorporated in this as the South Island Prosperity Project back in 2016 and created the first 5-year plan, 5-year strategic plan. So we are now just wrapping up our 3rd year. Next year we enter our 4th year, and so you'll be able to see quite a lot of the results that have happened in a very short span of time. So I'd just like to say that there are sort of rationale, the early rationale can be summarized in 3 major points for building this organization. 1, the economy is regional. This map alone is very telling. So this is just taking the top 8 companies of the region, the top major employers, and saying where did the people live and work. So this map has been really easy for us just to show and say, obviously, we're interdependent. You know, our residents don't just stay within the boundaries of our municipality. We don't exist without each other. Secondly, regional collaboration unlocks opportunities that are not available to us as municipal units or organizations alone. So this allows us to access federal and provincial funding that we just didn't have access to before. And I have a really good example is the Smart Cities project, which we'll get into in just a moment. The other piece is that taxpayer investment, so your investments, representing the taxpayer, of course, can be leveraged. So not just provincial government funding, federal government funding, which is very significant, but also private sector funding. Oops, too fast. Rationale number 3 is that future-proofing our region requires all hands on deck. It requires a sort of collaborative framework. The solutions are not going to just come from government, and they're not just going to come from the private sector. The marriage of the two allows us to build the vision of the elected leadership, along with the agility and innovation of the business sector. So how do we do this? In 5 major areas, we focus on business and investment attraction, First Nations economic development, collaboration, communication, and research, business growth and expansion, and something called cluster development. And that's really about what's the strategy, your long-term strategy to future-proof your region and create those next generation of jobs. So just some quick highlights, because this isn't a long presentation, but we've been we're just wrapping up again our 3rd year, and in a very short span of time, we've been able to demonstrate some real traction. So some highlights are we've spearheaded this new index called the Prosperity Index, which you'll see on the left, and that allows us to measure our economy year after year and be able to compare it to other regions around the world. And that way we can say, okay, our population might have grown, or maybe the tech sector has grown, but as a proportion, are we getting more diverse or less diverse as an economy? So are we going in the right direction? To date, we do not have these kinds of figures, and we don't have the platform to bring everyone together to understand what's really going on in our economy. The second one I'll just mention is that we're developing right now the first of its kind in the world called a Mobility Wellness Index, which is connected to our Smart Cities proposal. And that is something that's already being picked up by Montreal and other places around the world who are very interested in this kind of cutting edge research that connects how is well-being for citizens connected to how we move around and travel around the region. That's going to be March 12th. Everyone is invited to do that first release of the two indices here. So the March 12th will be the release of the first Mobility Wellness Index, and also the Prosperity Index, our 2nd annual. So the other thing we're doing is we're attracting next generation jobs. Last year we were able to announce that we helped, after working with this company a year, attracted a company called Daytan, which is a software development firm. Their plans are to start off, they've brought over about 15 people from Brazil. They're planning to build to 100 to 200 new jobs here that will be locally hired within the next 1 to 2 years. So for our size market, this is a whale. We don't have a market like Vancouver. If we bring 200, if we need to hire 200 people tomorrow in the tech sector, we can't do it. So this is a great company for us. We can build with them organically. They win awards for their family orientation and their quality of employment, and we're working with them sort of hand in hand over the months as they grow and their needs change. The other thing we're doing is something called the Business Connect. So we work with a lot of companies that are looking to get more into exports. So we focus on exports because they are the ones that create spin-off demand in other sectors. So by helping an exporting company, you tend to be creating more spin-off jobs in, let's say, retail or services. So it means that we can have more bang for our buck. So that's why we do that. There's quite a few that are from your area. You might know of Peninsula in general. Titan Boats, I believe, is local. Seasider is another local one. But some of those kinds of companies, quite a lot from the Peninsula generally, because there are a lot of exporters concentrated to that area. Something we're very proud of, it's almost unheard of in the region, is we have 7 First Nation members. So we started off with 1, and we've been able to build a lot of traction here. So we have all of the Peninsula First Nations now on board. We do one-on-one economic advisory services for them. We also have something called the Indigenous Connect, which is a monthly forum for Indigenous entrepreneurs to get together and look at leadership and look at entrepreneurship. And we also help spearhead the Saanich Innovation Center and get the grant funding to get that going. And then lastly, we're working on something called the Indigenous Smart Mobility Pilot, which is a pilot to help improve transportation connections to the First Nation communities to get to places like school, services, employment. The other piece that's worth highlighting is something that you should all be proud of, you participated in, the Smart South Island Vision 2040, which is the guiding document that helps us build our plans of where we want to be over the next 22 years. So in areas like housing and affordability, transportation and mobility, economic resilience and inclusion, environmental health, and human health, we looked at setting up from there the 10 municipal representatives and our First Nation representatives, along with a few nonprofits, set up goals for where we're trying to take the region. So what are our greatest challenges, and then what are we trying to overcome? And then they made that a call to action for the private sector to come up with innovations to get us there. And when I say private sector, I also mean the open citizens. So we've ran now 2 open innovation challenges, asking citizens, and the second one was a future innovator challenge focused on students, to say, how would you solve some of these pressing problems in our region? This is our major announcement. Of course, it was a very big deal for the region. We were selected as one of 20 from 200 communities across the country that applied to be one of Canada's Smart Cities Challenge leaders. So we are now in the finalist category. We received $250,000 in funding to develop our second proposal to be able to win $10 million in transportation innovation for the region. If we are able to bring home that $10 million, we can leverage that into possibly $20 or $30 million, depending on the model that we choose. So this is a real focus for us. It's connected to a lot of our other business development activities because there's a major tie-in to our industry strengths. So smart cities, of course, is sort of all the rage around the world, about $1 trillion industry globally. What does it mean? A lot of it is about civic technologies that help governments run their cities better. Could be around congestion or pollution, governance, etc. So it's all the sort of modern cities are now looking at how do we use data and connected technology to be able to improve citizen outcomes and run cheaper, run more efficiently, and improve our outcomes. So just a quick word now about Sydney. Of course, Sydney, you're one of 10 municipal partners. Your contribution level is $26,722. We thank you. We're grateful for this contribution. Of course, the model is refreshing, I think, in some ways, is that no matter what your contribution level, you have one vote. So it's just as significant as a more populated municipality like Victoria or Saanich, who are contributing more, close to about $200,000. The other piece is that your funding also leverages private sector investment. So we now have 23 business members who contribute $10,000 a year. Of course, for them, the crux is that we have the municipal collaboration in place. So that's really key. The last piece is that we're able, with this investment, to unlock investments that are not attainable otherwise. So hundreds of thousands to perhaps millions of dollars that can come in from different levels of government each year that are funneled into long-term sustainable economic development. So at the cost of $2 per capita, which is actually quite a lot lower than the provincial average, Canadian average, which is $5.50 per capita. So next year, we invite you to participate in our organizational review. Being in our 4th year of a 5-year strategic plan, it's a time to take a deep dive and say, where is the organization at? What's its mandate? What's the mission? Do we need to refine anything? How can we improve? Is the model where we want to be? And make those suggestions. Because of course, this is an investment, your investment, that you've been making for quite a while. And of course, we want our so-called shareholders, the members of our organization, to really look at what the future should hold for regional economic development and for this collaborative model. Just to give you a sense, we're already getting probably more attention internationally and nationally than we are sometimes, I think, locally. I think that's maybe always the case, but we're really getting some significant traction and some awards for the regional model that is fairly unique in Canada and even unique in the world. So just some examples. We were at the International Economic Development Council, which is the largest of its kind in the world. We've been recognized with a regional governance award this year for this unique approach to economic development. We were also a recipient of the Smart 21 Communities Award by the Intelligent Communities Forum. Again, a couple years ago, we weren't considered a smart region at all, so we're very proud of this. We were also shortlisted 1 in 5 for our governance model, again, this sort of collaborative network at the Smart City World Expo Congress in Barcelona, and that's the preeminent global Smart City conference in all the world, and it's been going on for 12 years. We lost to Qatar, and I like to think that they probably put about $1 billion into their model, so we're still quite proud. And the last one is we were shortlisted, of course, from 200 communities down to 1 in 20 for this Smart Cities Challenge Award. And we're really leveraging this brand across Canada and getting a lot of attention for that. This is an 11-year-long program for $300 million. So it's also something that's not just the flavor of the month. It's something that the provincial government is increasingly allocating funds to as well. And we've been considered leaders in the country, early movers, particularly, again, for this governance model. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you have some questions. And if not, well, thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee? Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for that. A couple things I'm wondering about is you mentioned the business attraction process and encouraging exports and looking to build businesses that are here already by allowing them to do more exports. I'm wondering, how do our businesses in Sydney and North Saanich become aware of these opportunities? Do they have to sign up, or are you reaching out to them, or how do they get involved or become aware of those sorts of opportunities that are available?
Yeah, great question. A little bit of a give and take. So we try to use mostly through our network contacts. So for example, chambers of commerce and so forth. We've also done several outreaches with the EDC here as well, and gone to the Sydney Breakfast Club and things like that. So try to work that way. We have a lot of a deep sort of network just with our team as well. So our director of innovation was the former VP of Schneider Electric, for example, another sort of Peninsula business, obviously huge. They did 180 million in exports from the Peninsula. So we definitely have a pretty solid network, but we can always use more. And if you know ever of a company, please pass on the name for us. That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more. So in regards to your business attraction and your concierge services, how do you see that working with our local chamber of commerce or other local business sort of organizations? Like, at what point do you get some information? How far do you go with that? But do you pass it off to the chamber then, or some other group to follow through, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I answered it a couple different ways. So one, we're very different than a chamber model. So the chambers are organizations that we would tend to say, once they've gotten to a point where they're ready to come, then you would probably want to join your local chamber. So that would be a piece where there'd be specific membership benefits you get as a business member of a chamber. Very different. Like, we don't go typically after the same types of customers. So our members, for example, they're not going to get benefits that you would get typically with it's not like the heavy on the events. There's not the B2B networking component. It really is about just improving the overall economy. So yeah, so we certainly work with partners, a vast array of partners in the investment attraction. The others that we work with are the BC trade offices, and there's trade commissioners worldwide from the federal government as well. So we work quite substantially with the provincial and federal governments worldwide to help try to attract these companies.
And one more. Mm-hmm. So I really like the you talked about the index, the benchmarks you're establishing, the data you're collecting, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What level of granularity will there be for that? So that is it just going to be, here's what the South Island looks like, or will it be broken down by Saanich Peninsula or different areas so that we can tap into that sort of more specific information that might be relevant and useful for us?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I won't say that I'm the expert on that. I might almost rather Dallas answer that question. I think right now that they're based on these international standards organization indicators, so that we can compare apples to apples, because that's always the drawback with data sets that they don't compare to anything, so you don't really know anything. It's difficult to make to do analysis. So they're based on 140 of these ISO indicators. And then we try to filter that through a lens of where we think it's important for people to be focused in terms of the most common barriers or enablers to prosperity. So having said that, we've got the full Excel sort of sheet, in addition, the full exhaustive list on our website with data sets. I don't know if they're broken down by municipal level, and that's something that we could certainly look at in the future. Every year we try to make some improvements on the model.
Good.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Emily. I had a question. When you were talking about the proportion of UVic grads who end up staying here, I was thinking, it's a research university, and there's only going to be so many jobs you can get for somebody who did a PhD in mathematics or, molecular chemistry, right? So I'm wondering what percentage of, say, maybe our Camosun students or other trades college stay locally, and if you have that kind of information.
I don't know at the top. I'm going to look up.
93% of Camosun students stay here.
Okay.
So Camosun's very locally oriented as opposed to UVic, which isn't the case at this point. But
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And of course, you'll need both, because if you look at how the engines of the economy, the knowledge workers are really critical as well. There are knowledge workers for sure coming out of Camosun, but they have some prominent programs like the Gustafson School's great, and a lot of their engineers and so on. We know that a lot of companies have trouble actually recruiting those types of people. And we at the same time know that many are leaving that are qualified. So there's this gap. So we're working with some of the bigger companies, for example, like Babcock Canada, saying, well, how do we address this gap? A lot of what they're looking at is, well, how do we look at the affordability question? How do we look at some of these bigger systemic issues where people that, let's say you're an engineer graduating from UVic, and you think it'll take you 20 years to buy a house, those aren't good prospects. So we have to look at, that's why we're so focused on transportation, which is as a percentage of your income, really a big part of the affordability question. So there's not a silver bullet for the problem, but there's lots of ways to kind of look at improving it.
All right, and my next question, it's probably more of your year 4 review about what kind of economic development model you're looking at. But I was struck by when I was reading through the materials you sent us and the emphasis on the export companies, and I understand why you've done that to create more spin-off jobs, and you're really in your first 5 years focusing on that, that so many of the motions coming out of Victoria are towards getting off of fossil fuels and environmental initiatives, and I feel like these things are going to start really running into headwinds when we're creating things to export by container ship and by airplanes and trying to grow industry, and whether that is actually in fact future-proofing, which is part of your big mission, and again, at what point we start kind of looking at where that trade-off comes in.
Yeah, those are always really good points. I think partly it's about balancing out what's your sort of 10-year plan, your 5-year plan, and your short-term plan. So where you want to bring the economy is kind of the question. And we don't come up with that vision in a silo. That's with our stakeholders. So I'd say that's an important question. I don't think there's a definitive answer. I think we need to work that out. I think it'd be a good part of the organizational review. But I would also say that exports more and more should be considered knowledge and thinking and so on. So what we're trying to build is actually to become known as an ideal place for companies to test ideas, to test them where they can manufacture them or whatever worldwide, not to create necessarily everything in one spot all in the South Island, but we can be known for innovation, we can be known for experimentation and known for innovative thinking, which is why our smart cities work, we're very focused on something called civic technology, because it brings together these types of companies that are very knowledge intensive.
Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I found the material interesting. I, for one, certainly have more to learn, I think, about SIP, and I appreciate the insight you provided us. No financials with the package. I'd kind of like to see where you're spending the money specifically. Are those on your website? Are they available?
Yeah, of course. So every year we have 2 sets of financials that are on our website. So
Yeah.
and you can see the build up in our documents section. We have our operating plan, the annual operating plan. So you'll see a full budget and details around what the projects are. And then we also do annual audited statements every year as well.
Good, thank you. Just around growing your membership, so it looks like from the material we have 10 municipalities involved out of a total of 45 members. Those municipalities provide 49% of your budget, if I read this correctly.
Yeah.
And you're not sure what year 4 and 5, what that looks like. So what's the plan to grow that private sector aspect here, please?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, it's probably not the answer you're looking for, but we don't want to end up ever in a position where we're looking at a mass member model. So that would start to blur the lines between how we are different from a chambers of commerce, as an example, where they tend to try to attract more companies. So we're really looking at only the largest employers of the region. My guess is it'll cap somewhere around 75 members in total. However, I will say that leverage, that getting towards 50-50 ratio, is something that I don't know of another. Halifax is the only one I know that approaches that number in terms of the ratio for municipal funding leveraging private sector funding. So we're already at pretty much a gold standard if you look at Canadian models across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Just back to the 85% number from UVic grads that tend to not stay. And I'm wondering if your research or anything you've looked into has shown whether it's because of the precarious nature of contract work. It was the case when I graduated more than 20 years ago, and when my son graduated recently. The friends that he had that graduated, as well as mine that moved away, got permanent employment. The ones that stayed here was contract work, and you're going from one, and eventually they just said, this is enough and I have to go. So is it something that's sort of specific to our region, and is there a way to battle that somehow?
Unfortunately, it's just kind of the way the world is going with this kind of gig economy concept, if you've maybe heard that being rattled off. But yeah, it is unfortunately the way that everything is going. There's more and more of that sort of freelance or contract and so on. So it's something we're aware of as a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere. We do have certain impact criteria, so we don't work with companies that are outside of our impact criteria. One of them is we're looking to create household sustaining jobs, and those are permanent and they're full-time and so on. So they aren't contract jobs. So that's the direction we know we want to go. There are quite a lot of companies that do fit that bill, and sort of working with those companies to try to expand that. It's all about sort of building this ecosystem overall. So you need big companies, small, medium. You need new coming in, and it creates a sort of healthy environment where at least if you lose a job, you have somewhere else to go. Yeah. Right now, that's a big barrier for us as well. People, when we're trying to do recruitment, a lot of spousal hires, that's what they call it. So, your wife or your husband can't find a job, but you might have had a good job. And they want to look at the economy and see enough diversity and churn that it looks like, well, I can throw, I can toss my hat in the ring too.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm pleased that Sydney has a seat as one of the municipalities on the Partners Council, and pleased to be sitting in that role and just attending the second meeting as a new council member. And our second meeting was just this afternoon. Very impressive that this model has collaboration at its center. Sitting on the CRD board this year, collaboration seems to be a renewed spirit of collaboration around that 24-member board. And here on the Peninsula, the 3 mayors have met a number of times and look to work in a spirit of collaboration as well. And I think it's impressive that you can bring municipalities, First Nations, post-secondary institutions, industry associations like the Viatech and others along with the private sector. A question was, it was certainly innovative in terms of your participation, the participation of SIP with the Songhees Innovation Center, and that looks quite remarkable. Given that the four bands on the peninsula are now members, do you see an opportunity, possibly down the road, that a similar innovation center might happen on the peninsula?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we work with, each nation has usually unique focuses and priorities and so on. So what we tend to do is not ever kind of say, we've got this model and it's for you, but sort of try to work with what are the self-directed economic development focuses or priorities. So as an example, we were looking with Sayut at an aquaculture opportunity. Another one is in Beecher Bay, looking at making some improvements around transportation, and they'd have no Wi-Fi connection. They were actually have very poor isolation and very poor connectivity to the rest of the region. I won't. It'll make everyone cry, I think, if I tell you all these stories, but we're unearthing quite a lot of this. There's also a lot of governance challenge. So some are not as maybe sexy as the Innovation Center, but they're critical because they're about governance and managing priorities and understanding the local opportunities and challenges. And they're all very different, I guess, is the short. We can provide grant support and connections from both an advocacy perspective and also grant writing perspective. So that's what we're ready and willing and able to do.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
The second question is the Prosperity Index, which is on the website as a standalone document. First year was 2017 with 144 metrics. And so it's on March 12th that the 2018 will be released?
March 12th, exactly.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's intended that will be an annual, those metrics will be able to continue on an annual basis?
Exactly, yeah. And year over year, they become quite a lot richer. So by year 5, they'll be really nice because you can start looking at a 5-year trend line and then looking at your incremental change over 1 year compared to the last 5. That's when you start to really get into interesting work. And the ISO standards themselves are becoming more and more commonly used worldwide. So again, it's just getting more richness in the data.
And with those ISO being an international metrics, and the current document is the region in one column and the country, or cities across the country in the other column. Might there be an international column added at some point?
There is, yeah. We are looking at international comparables as well, and that's the advantage again of that international standards organization. They do various benchmarking for the world. And so the World Council on City Data is putting forward the ISO standards that we use, which allows us to compare globally.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you so much for your time and your questions.
I have a question. When SIP came to Sydney Council 3 years ago looking for participation and funding support, in the presentation that was made, there were 3 success measures that were presented, and what council was told at that time was when you came back in 3 years looking for renewal of that funding, you would be presenting how you had measured up relative to those things. And the 3 things were number of new jobs in targeted sectors, median household income, and amount of project funding raised. So I'm kind of wondering why you didn't mention these measures tonight.
Well, a couple things. One, I don't know if you're aware, our fiscal year is actually April 1 to March 31st. So we're not at the end of our 3rd year. We'll actually be able to do that after our AGM. Our AGM is in June. So that's sort of our cycle. Unfortunately, it doesn't align with the calendar year. So we actually began the organization on April 1st, 3 years ago. So that's part of the reason. Also, we're doing, of course, an organizational review, and an organizational review allows you to really take a deep dive. It's quite a costly analysis. I'm not sure if you're aware. So we'll be working with a third-party evaluator to do the economic impact analysis for us and look at the future of the model and so forth. That'll be a committee made up of members that will look for volunteers and also some board members and key stakeholders, and then be able to work through with an independent evaluator. So we're not going to tell you ourselves how well we're doing. We're going to have you work with an independent consultant to do that. So that's the major reason, of course, and entering our 4th year of a 5-year strategy. My understanding was those are 5-year strategy goals. If you look at our strategic plan on our website, which was approved and adopted by the members, those goals are actually over a 5-year period.
My recollection from being there at the table, and I actually have a copy of the presentation, was, basically what we were told was you would have performance measures in hand when you came back looking for renewal of funding. So
Yeah.
I understand that your fiscal year isn't lining up and you're looking at doing these evaluations later, but you're asking us to renew the funding now.
I believe that the request originally was actually a 5-year contribution. So it is renewal funding for years 4 and 5, but it's for the rest of the region is looking at this as a 5-year investment, which is a very short period of time for a whole organization to start creating a lot of these metrics. We're certainly not skirting that, but that's something that will come out after we've actually completed our 3rd year.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any final questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next item on our agenda. And this is a presentation by the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce and Denny Warner, the Executive Director. And you've got the floor.
Yeah, it was already on. That I won't be doing the presentation. So I'll introduce you to Andy in a moment. I just wanted to clarify one other thing, which was that in the agenda package that was online today, I know that you all had the update, which is just the first 4 pages of the Chamber's material or what you're considering tonight. But I just wanted to state that for the record so that everybody else who'd already read it understood that. So I'm pleased to be here tonight to introduce Andy Hook, who is a founding partner of the business Hook & Hook Renovations and Design, and her office is in West Sydney, and she's going to be doing our presentation tonight. And yes, it's a little bit different from what you've got. What we decided to do was a little bit of history and background about what the Chamber is and what we do for the interest of some of the new councillors that maybe are not that aware about what it is that a Chamber does. So that's what you're going to get from Andy, but we're happy to answer questions about the specific proposal and about our organization at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. And she's already got my first little line, so I'll continue on. Thank you for having us. And I'm going to delve into the history of the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. We were organized 107 years ago. Sounds like a long time ago. In 1912, as the Sydney Board of Trade. In 1947, we incorporated as the Sydney and North Saanich Chamber of Commerce. And then in 1983, we expanded to include the District of Central Saanich and became the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. There has been much political chat over the past few years about the amalgamation, and some would argue that the Peninsula is a natural place to start. We recognized the wisdom in that 36 years ago, and we are widely supportive of the efforts the mayors of all 3 municipalities are making to work together. And a sample of some of our activities. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a lot, but we have highlighted a few, and flat maps is one of them that we want to go over. We print 40,000 each year and distribute to hotels in Victoria. The airport uses tons. We go through thousands at our info center. And the Sydney Info Center uses them also, and they are distributed to marinas and member businesses. And our new resident packages are also something we want to highlight. We have collected items and coupons from member businesses around here, and we put them into nice bags with a little welcome letter. Our local realtors and developers love them, and they hand them out to their new clients and new residents to the area. All highway signage is something else. The Ministry of Transportation is now enforcing the signage manual they developed in 2013. So most of the community signage for all 3 municipalities that is on the highway does not conform and will be removed. Municipalities are responsible for deciding which business sectors should be represented. We have been working with our members and the Ministry of Transportation staff to catalog this existing signage, determine which signs are slated to be removed, and plan what's to go up there in their place. And finally, the truck stop. Everything we use on the island arrives by truck. Much of our garbage leaves by truck. So it is very important, and our trucks have nowhere to park. This has created conflict and dangerous parking situations. We have created a working group comprised of the MLA, the BC Ferries staff, Ministry of Transportation staff, Asset Management branch staff, potential private investors, and our board, of course, and staff, to assess the possibility of developing a property behind our chamber. Yeah. Membership breakdown. We have been steady with about 325 members currently, plus or minus for several years. Sydney at 42 or 46.2%, which is almost half. And North Saanich is up a bit at 13.8. Central Saanich is at 18.5. Victoria is 16.3, and the other is 5.2. If you're interested to know the size of our businesses, the members broken down by number of employees. Businesses with more than 1 to 4 employees, which mine falls into, is 58%. Businesses with 5 to 19 employees is 27%. And businesses with 20 plus employees is 10%, and non-for-profit is 5%. And the Information Center history. Lovely little building. In 1985, the mobile home moved to the site to house the Information Center and the Chamber office. The Chamber moved office to Sydney in 1991. The Info Center was renovated in 92 and then in 97. The Info Center closed in 2013. It was renovated again in 2015. The Chamber office relocated back to the Pat Bay location, and the center reopened. In 2017, the Town of Sydney issues RFP for delivery of Victoria services at Sydney Center. The Chamber did not bid, as the Pat Bay was not identified as a delivery location. And since 2017, we've been focusing on offering information about the Saanich Peninsula to the visitors at our center. When we opted not to bid on the RFP for operating the Sydney Visitor Center, we turned our attention to strict promotion of our members on the Saanich Peninsula. It was freeing not to be required to stock all the provincial guides and information that directed visitors elsewhere, and our members have appreciated this focus. We continue to lobby for assistance from the Ministry of Tourism and Arts and Culture to bring love and attention to our site, so visitors are given a better first impression of the island and of the peninsula. You will note from our proposal document that while the number of visitors inside the center has dropped from the heyday in the 1980s, we received a high volume of visitors to the site, 44,000 and more a year, which makes sense because who doesn't go online nowadays? And we have plenty of opportunity to direct these visitors into Sydney and throughout the peninsula. A background on our funding request. In October 2016, the District of North Saanich Council and Chamber signed a $25,000 fee for service agreement in 2017, I should say. In fall 2017, the fee for service agreement with the District of North Saanich was renewed for 2018. In March 2018, the Mayor Finnell sent a letter to the Sydney Council requesting your consideration for joining the District of North Saanich in funding the Chamber's activities. November 2018, provided a draft submission to the EDC for the Sydney-specific project funding. And last month, we met with the Sydney Peninsula mayors, who encouraged us to present a joint municipal funding proposal for this year and 2020. And also, we're applying for incremental funding for a full-time coordinator to develop commercial and industry sectorially focused tours, workshops, and conferences. And that was really quick, so you have lots of time for questions.
Questions from committee? Go ahead.
Yeah, whichever one of you want. So, on the slide where you're, listing off your services, one of the things you had was a new business relocation assistance. Now, one of the things we heard from the SBIA in their ask is that they want to be able to provide this service within Sydney for Sydney businesses. And so I'm just wondering, for comparison, do you have an idea how many calls you get from Sydney businesses?
Yeah, I guess it would be fairly anecdotal, the kind of information, because I don't keep statistics on that, but several people have asked me, so it's clear it's probably something that we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to guess, I would say that throughout the peninsula, I probably get calls maybe 5 or 6 a month from people that are either looking to relocate or just find more information about doing business on the peninsula.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much, Denny and Andy, for your presentation. Appreciate it. Just wanted to get some feedback from you in terms of the changes that were announced most recently around the West Sydney Industrial Group and what that means to your membership structure and what it means, I guess, to capacity with your existing structure, be it staff or volunteers.
So I don't see there being too much additional work for staff because we're already doing a fair number of those kinds of activities, and really it's just there will be some support for some of the really convening meetings and that kind of thing for those members. The board has committed, and the staff, to doing some significant outreach to the members of that group that are not members currently of the chamber, and actually to bring in some of those if that's their choice. But we will still be doing the kinds of activities that were done before on their behalf. It gives an opportunity for them to either be more involved than maybe they were before.
Okay, thank you. And so with that in mind, and certainly the piece in the Peninsula News Review most recently, something that came out of our visit to West Sydney businesses and meeting with that group was the stress and the emphasis excuse me, on the lack of affordable housing, and hence, in part, because of that, the lack of employees in the local market in order for their businesses to expand. This role that you're adding as a contract position is geared more towards, as I understand it, the educational piece for your members. Is there a prospect of that role crossing over and helping the chamber to address those issues that are of significance to your members?
I think that one of the reasons why we're in this position of having this understanding that we've had from all of the contact that we have with the businesses, we've understood that there is a shift now, and that we're not in a position really to be attracting new businesses to this area because everybody is already looking for staff. So what we don't need necessarily are more businesses. But what we do need to do is some community building so that there are the kinds of things in place that would attract people to live here and make it more appealing and just financially viable for them to do so. So that's the kind of thing that we're working on. And so the educational piece of that is really for all of us that are involved in what I would call community development. It's not just economic development, to have a better understanding of the needs in the community from the business level. And so it's really just looking closer into those sectors and seeing what it is that they're facing and how we can either support them, or I think what I see is providing a lot of linkages. Like, I think sometimes people are just so busy doing their jobs, they don't realize that there's a company over here that actually does something that could be very helpful. And so it's just really creating some positive connections.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. So you mentioned you've got 325 members. Is that a pretty static number, or?
It has
Okay.
been for a while. We're one of the few chambers actually that has not had a drop in membership, as far as I know.
So one of the things I would imagine for a business is they keep looking at overhead and ongoing costs, so that they're continuing to stay with you is speaks to, I would presume that they're getting value for money. What about involvement in the chamber? Are you finding that the members overall are participating, are bringing their voices to the table?
Yeah, it really depends on the business. And I like to say when people talk about membership recruitment that we have every business that joins the chamber joins for a different reason. So for some people it's the networking, some people it's the marketing promotion, for some people it's just the opportunity to have access to maybe some advocacy if they're dealing with problems or they just want to have some more information. And a lot of our members, it's really about the visitor services. So it just depends on the business. But yep, people are engaged in a variety of different ways. And
Okay.
so you'll see actually we're just developing a lot of our statistics for our year end, which happens we're based on the calendar year, but our AGM is in March, and so we're doing our year-end report, and we'll present all of that about the kind of engagement that we've had.
Okay, so I see that you're bringing on the Sydney North Saanich Industrial Group.
We did, yes.
Yep, and also that you are working with home-based businesses. I mean, that's quite a disparity between types of
Right. Yes.
ways of working. So do you find that there is so much variety that you're having, that your model has to shift to adjust to?
I see a lot of what we do is just providing people with information. We're kind of a clearinghouse, that's what I feel that we do. So we take in a lot of information, whether it's about programs or activities or events, and just share that information because people don't really have access to it sometimes on their own. So we're a clearinghouse and just I really just see it as connecting people to either information or other businesses or.
Definitely. As a business owner, I've only been here since 2016. I completely agree. They've just helped me develop and find ways to connect with other people.
So one last thing, I look at some of what you're providing and what we heard the SBIA providing, and also now with SIP, I'm concerned about overlap and where we're looking at municipally funding, and we're funding perhaps for the same thing. One thing that just sort of leaps out at me is you talked off the top that you have a flat map, and I know the SBIA does a map. What's the difference between your maps?
Well, ours is peninsula wide, and so ours is the one that goes into the hotels in Victoria. So that's a real way for them to send people out this way. I don't know where all of their information is distributed, but I think it's more the format of ours that appeals to people. It's just people find it easier to use. Same thing at the airport. She said that we had a conversation about that, the woman who looks after their visitor services out there, and she just said that they don't actually like the format of that one, so they don't rack it out there.
Is there a way of collaborating on those two projects?
There may be. I don't know. We've done our map for, I don't even know how long. That map we've just been done for years, and it's really popular. So I don't know if there's a way to do things differently. I'm open to that. That's one of the things too. I'm not happy about having any overlap. If we can avoid it at all, that's
Okay.
yeah. So that may be a good place to start. I don't know.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you for the presentation. I guess I'll start off with saying what I like about what's being proposed is that it involves the whole peninsula. And so as we heard in the SIP sort of presentation and some of the things that we've been talking about as well as the need to collaborate more, and that a lot of these things that we have to deal with in terms of not enough employees or improving economic development or transportation, it's not going to get solved by Sydney by itself. So I like the idea of the chamber having that peninsula-wide focus and being able to sort of be a point of contact for businesses throughout our region out here to kind of connect people and provide services. So I think that's a good thing. I like that, recognition that, the chamber's not going to solve the problems of affordable housing or transportation necessarily. You can continue to advocate for that, but that you're focused on helping businesses that are here to be better. And so that's one of the things that I've been looking for in terms of economic development. There's only a certain amount that, local government through the taxpayers' dollars can do. So I think that there's a lot of benefit in any sorts of things that you're doing that will help existing businesses. As Emily, I think, mentioned in her presentation or their documentation, a lot of the new business development will come from existing businesses. So I like that your focus is on some of these things and helping existing businesses to do better, like you've indicated. So I think the home office workshop, I think, is a good thing to be able to bring those people who are perhaps feeling quite isolated in the community, and an opportunity for them to come together and exchange best practices or lessons learned, what doesn't work, sort of thing. And I think the local career education could really have a really good impact out here. When my kids went to Parkland, and I had no clue of all the stuff going on over at Sydney North Saanich Industrial Park, about the types of businesses there, the type of careers that are there. So I think, you guys getting together with the North Saanich Industrial Group and this local career education thing could be a real winner, I think. And kids can start looking at things that there's more beyond the hospitality sector that they can do for work in Sydney. In regards to the tours, those are great. The one that we went on was a good opportunity for local councillors to get familiar with what's going on. I wonder whether you would also expand those to attract, I know you're not really focused on attracting a whole lot of business, but it just seemed to maybe be a link to maybe something, if the SIP folks are working on getting people to come out to look at what's available, maybe one of those tours could accommodate people that they're working with to come and take a look. So I don't know if that's something.
Definitely. We know that the tours are a really important part of what people like to see and do, just to get better acquainted with the businesses that are working in this area. And so I think there's a lot more that can be done with tours.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's it for me.
Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Andy and Denny. It was with great pleasure that we had the opportunity for the, I think a first time perhaps, for the myself and two colleagues on the Peninsula to meet with yourself and board representation, and I thought it was a great first discussion that hopefully we can continue. Three things. Well, one is congratulations on the range of activities that you do provide to businesses across the peninsula. And it is quite a broad spectrum. As Councillor Fallett mentioned, you're dealing with an extremely wide range of businesses, as we know, exist on the peninsula. Just out of curiosity, traditionally the Chamber's not been involved with home-based business. I'm not sure any of the business organizations have. How do you connect with home-based businesses on the peninsula, Sydney and the peninsula?
I think you'd be surprised how many businesses that we have as members that are home-based. And I think that one of the reasons why our organization appeals to them is because it is a way for them to get more visible in the community and to connect with people. Sometimes it is kind of a lonely endeavor working from home. And so a lot of the consultants that are members, Doug? So we get a lot of feedback from them just about the kinds of activities that we can do. And so sometimes for them our networking events are important, just a way for them to get out to meet people. And it is a really important segment of our economy.
The second is, I learned something from your slides in terms of the signage initiative, highway signage initiative that you have underway. Of course, that has been a topic of discussion off and on for a number of years for a lot of businesses in Sydney and the Peninsula. Is it, and maybe it's a question actually through staff, or perhaps, Denny, you have an answer in terms of the local governments being involved in terms of signage. Are they consulted at some point?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, Mr. Mayor. I don't have an answer for that at this point. I don't believe we've had any engagement with the province regarding signage, highway signage. Not recently, certainly.
Okay, so again, this signage wouldn't be, municipal signage if it said Sydney on it and that sort of thing. It's going to be specifically the businesses and, tourism signage and that sort of thing.
So it used to be that some of the businesses actually had their name up on signs that were on the highway. And when they came out with their new manual in 2013, they weren't enforcing any of it. But as the signs age, and a lot of them are on the highway corridor, now that they're not conforming, that's my understanding from several conversations with staff, is that they are going to take them down. And it will be up to each individual municipality to decide which, and it won't even be the individual businesses, it will just be the section. So it might say farm tours, or it will say, but it's up to each municipality to decide which of the businesses, those sectors, want to be represented on the signs. It's kind of more just downloading, really, is what's happening. And it puts municipalities in a really awkward position to have to decide, well, which of these potentially, it's going to be a tricky situation.
So you may be engaging the 3 municipalities at some point?
Yes, so that was our plan, so that's why we're undertaking the catalog of the signs that are existing. Then they're going to identify which of the ones that are not conforming, and then we'll be able to go back and say, well, these are the sectors that are the businesses within these areas that should be signed. What are our options within there? And so then the municipalities, but at least from our conversations with North Saanich and their staff, they felt that somehow it might take some of the tension away if the chamber was somehow in the middle of that, because they didn't want to be the organization that decided whose signs should be on the highway.
Does that also clarify, having a highway location that you do for the visitor center in your offices? Does that help inform, or are you already aware of what the limitations or the opportunities are on the chamber leased property on the edge of the highway?
Yeah, I'm pretty aware of what signage of the North Saanich signage bylaw. But the interesting thing about the highway is that there are not very many municipalities that sort of abut each other like Sydney and North Saanich does. So it creates some interesting tensions where there's certain signs that they'll say, oh, well, we're going to designate, like for instance at Beacon, even though there are businesses that you would access in North Saanich off Beacon, that Highways has said, no, that Beacon corridor is mostly for Sydney. So they're going to have to make some decisions about appropriate signage to attract people to other areas. Okay.
Last question is just a clarification, because other councillors have raised it about the Sydney North Saanich Industrial Group coming on board. I know at one time when they first formed, there was a specific number of businesses, and they put out some figures in terms of their sales, nearly $1 billion, and their payroll, in excess of 100 million, and so on. But I understand that the group actually has members in Central Saanich?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so is it formalized in terms of there are an X number of businesses in the 3 municipalities that consider themselves part of this group?
Yeah, so I think the founding members, that's kind of changed over time. And so a lot of the people that were involved initially are not as involved anymore. And then there are some new ones that have kind of come along. And so some of those were in North Saanich. So for instance, Schneider and Quester Tangent and a few of those other ones have. So it definitely is more of a peninsula organization than its initial name would have suggested.
Great. Thank you again for your presentation.
Any further questions or comments? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay, we'll move on to our next presentation. This is by the Artsy Community Arts Council, and we've got a presentation by Diane Thorpe and perhaps others. And if you could push the button to turn on the microphone. That's it.
Is that it? Is it on now? Great. I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Diane Thorpe. I'm the president of Artsy Community Arts Council. I have the treasurer with me, Susan Irvine, who's going to help me. We have just a few slides for us.
Oh, thank you. There you go. Wait, is there one more? Do we have one more? You got one more there?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
I can see the screen.
Yes, so I'd like to, first of all, just thank you for this opportunity for us to come and speak to you about our request. And I would also like to thank Andrew for his help just talking to us and working with us. This slide is just showing you that's what our request is. And where this funding is being directed. Strengthening organizational leadership capacity is basically the new position of the communications coordinator, which is Kirsten Norris, who has joined us in December, and she has really been a great help to us as a board with the amount of work that we are doing in all of these areas, strengthening organization, our capacity to support our core programs, improving our services to the memberships and volunteers and stakeholders, and improving the communications and our community engagement. Kirsten has acted as a great support on our board tasks with our strategic planning and assisting in the board members. So this has been for us a huge improvement in how our organization is moving forward. So we'll probably go to the next. So Artsy is a vital community resource. Our purpose is to promote and nurture and advocate for the local arts and cultural groups on the peninsula. That's beyond, we do, of course, have our wonderful centre thanks to the town of Sydney at Chalista Park, but we also are active in North Saanich as well as Central Saanich. With the regional arts community connector and collaborator, we work supporting awareness of local arts activities and events. We work with emerging artists right up to professional artists, new and established arts groups, arts and culture groups. We had a very interesting presentation just recently from a group, Deep Cove Folk, that is working on a new festival, which I hope they'll be able to present. We have a lot of members in the community who are just curious about art, and the benefit of the centre is that people can come into the centre and see the work that's on display there. There are resources in that area. There are people that they can speak to about arts. They can join the Arts Council and become involved in a volunteer in one or many of our events that we have. And so we are working, and we are actually accomplishing the goal of providing arts and cultural programs reflecting this community and the interests and the needs of the communities. This picture is the Lantern Festival, a little shot of the Lantern Festival, which is a wonderful festival happening in September or end of August with so much community participation. We do have a coordinator who works with us, and she works with the students of the First Nations schools and the different schools in the area to build their lanterns, with people turning up with their own costumes and their own lanterns. Our coordinator works, she'll be starting quite soon in the next few months on workshops showing people how to build the lanterns. Actually, she's leaving next week to go to Liverpool on a special international course on this lantern festivals, which are just a really wonderful method for people to come together. Our events that you'll know about is the Sydney Fine Arts Show, of course, which draws many people to the Peninsula. The studio tour, of which there are 2 studio tours. Our Artsy gallery, the visitors have gone up quite a lot in the last. Our new signage came up in December, and we've had a 25% increase. So it's fully rented. We present grants through to our member groups that belong to us as far as school scholarship. And we work to try to increase the grants over the year. So this is a snapshot for you to understand what our revenue sources are. So you'll see from here that the municipal grants make up 26%. BCAC, which is the British Columbia Arts Council, of which we are a member, that is in the 0.1%. We did have some funding from the Victoria Foundation, and that's listed in there. That's a 2%. The Sydney Fine Arts Show is 34.5%. It is our largest financial support for the organization, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful show, and it has so many positives about that show. It is supporting the artists, it's supporting the community, the people who live here. The only problem with the Sydney Fine Arts Show is that this is an event, and we need people to come to the town for this event. We plan the event. It's organized. If there was to have a weather issue or some kind of other problem that would interfere with the show, that funding may not be as robust from year to year. We cannot take that as a guarantee of financial support for us. It has been, and we certainly hope that it would continue to be, but its main focus in the community is to support the artists and to encourage and educate the people who live here. The opportunity for people on the peninsula to be able to see the standard of art that comes into the Sydney Fine Arts Show is really quite extraordinary in their own area. They don't have to travel very far. And we also actually find a great number of people from Victoria come to the show and all up and down the island. So then we do have a 7% that comes in from our Tulista rentals. The programs, we have a 12% of our funding comes through from them. And that would be Artisans, which is the show that happens at the center. And they have very popular shows right around that Christmas time and in spring. Membership is a 4%, 0.2, and then we have just other donations is a 0.5. So we just wanted to put that forward as a snapshot, and I know we did speak to you in December and gave you more of a picture of our organization. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Diane, for this presentation. So one of the things I hear is the town helps you out by providing you with the gallery space and your office space at Iroquois. So what's the difference between being an arts council and being one with a gallery space? Like, how does that differ, and how does that make things perhaps better?
I would definitely say it is a bonus. There are very few arts councils now that are left that have a space. There's not too many of them. And it allows us to be able to reach the community in more on a day-to-day basis rather than through events. Quite a few arts councils, it's through the events that I've listed that they'll have festivals and events to bring people forward. So the Tulista Gallery is sort of the heart, has become the heart of the arts community. The other major group that we know in town is the Saanich Peninsula Arts and Crafts, and they provide a service to visual artists and workshops and a sale. We also are assisting all forms of art, so as far as music is concerned, literary, all of the forms of art. So, but yes, Tulista is a great bonus for us. It also does require an amount of work, quite a lot of work, to ensure that that is properly, that we have enough volunteers there, which we are increasing our volunteers. We've put a screen in the center, and that will be advertising things like the sculpture walk. We're putting the map of the walk, so people who come into the center will know something about what they're seeing as they walk along the waterfront, and we'll be able to have some reference material at the center to be able to part of that. So I think the center, the positive parts, is that connection to the community, to people, not just the artists. We don't exist just for the artists, we're existing for the community.
So if you were to not have that space, would your Arts Council suffer measurably?
Yes, they would suffer. The Arts Council would suffer measurably. We would not go away. I think we're a pretty determined lot. So if that was the unfortunate outcome, I think we would find, well, we may have to go back to what we did in the beginning, which was meeting in people's homes, which happened for a very long time. And I would also like to thank the council at this point for the Iroquois space, because that space for us as a meeting room is vital. We have gone through planning sessions, and we can have that room. And we previously, the council met in the evenings at Tulista and made a space with around what other exhibit was there to meet. But the Iroquois building has given us an opportunity for ourselves, and also for our board members, but also for our committees that we are working with, along with Kirsten. That's one of her priorities, is to work with our program committees, and each of one of our programs have got a committee that supports that. Things like Studio Tour, and as I mentioned, the Sydney Fine Arts Show, etc. They use that room for their meetings, and Kirsten is working on having all of the program leads together, so everyone is kind of cooperating and finding ways that we can kind of increase our success.
Okay, the last thing I noticed that on your pie chart, I love pie charts, you list municipal CRD grants, which of course is not happening right now, but municipal money, and then BC Arts Council are your big, and the Sydney Fine Arts. But when I look at your gallery rentals, your programs, and your membership, that adds up to 4%. So that's a significant amount.
Yes, that's another, yes, and that's correct with your comment back onto the Tulista Center. If we didn't have this center, those, yes, the rentals would definitely be impacted.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question would be, where would they then go? Or would that now be something that disappears for the artists who aren't professional artists or the emerging artists, or even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, we had a group of people who come every year. They've attended a fabric workshop at UVic, and they use the space to come back together and to create their art, and that wouldn't be available to them without that space. So the space provides an opportunity for groups and members of the community to have more visibility within the community, but also exposure for developing themselves, and that. So that would be gone. In addition, it provides revenue, but more importantly, that opportunity would now disappear and it is fully subscribed.
And I have to say, on the note of your signage, that it made a 25% difference to your visitors. Looking at the signage, when I saw it just recently again, it pops out, and it's good. You did a fine job on that one, but it's a prime example that marketing matters.
Yes, and that's where our budget this year, we did, more was spent. And we have Susan Rocky on our board this year who's been leading us with our marketing. She has a background in marketing, and it's been hugely helpful for us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I've got
Thanks, Barbara.
Councillor Rentoul and then Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Diane, for coming this evening. I think you've understated, you described the group as determined. That might be an understatement. I've worked with you at the Sydney Fine Arts Show, and absolutely determined, and thank you for your success. Really, really pleased to see. I find the revenue stream fairly diverse, and I think that's a healthy thing. I get what you're saying about the risk associated with the Fine Arts Show, certainly, but it's diverse, and I think that's positive. Councillor Follett touched on it, but you're showing 26% revenue coming from municipal/CRD grants, and to clarify, the CRD grant portion, I take it you would be ineligible for in coming years if Sydney is no longer participant in the CRD Arts Council?
Yes, and we did receive $3,500 from the CRD for our Lantern Festival. So that, and we have a number of member groups, which I've commented on, and the member groups, a number of them also rely on the CRD grants. So we are looking at that, understanding that they will be asking us for more support.
Okay, but Artsy yourselves, your shortfall in the case of this example would be about $3,500 compared to what you received last year.
Yes, in a comparison, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So then you note in your final bullet in the package that was circulated to us, Diane, that you would entertain sort of a modest increase in the 2019 granting of funds to your Artsy members, and so you indicated that you granted $7,000 previously, with an additional $1,000 to a student scholarship. What does a modest increase look like if you were to receive this $20,000 increase from the town in terms of our contribution? What does a modest increase to your grant funds look like potentially?
I'll let Susan answer that because we looked at those.
Initially, with the loss of the CRD funds, the Lantern Festival funding of $3,500 would need to be absorbed into that modest increase.
Okay.
In order for, and that's a significant part of the Lantern funding. And then this year that we allocated $7,000 to granting, which was an increase of $4,000 over last year. So we would have to be looking at what our budget was, and a lot of the budget for the granting is dependent on revenues from the Sydney Fine Arts Show. So depending on the success and the revenue that we get back from the Sydney Fine Arts Show is redirected to areas such as the grant funding. So that would be an area that would be in play.
Okay, understood. Great, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Garner, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question sort of centers around the scholarship. You said it's increased to 1,000. What was it before?
I think it was 500. Yes, 500.
Now, does that go to one student, or is that spread out over, or more than
That
one?
was one student. That was in cooperation with the school. This is the Diane Cross scholarship.
And that's through Parkland?
Yeah.
Okay. And,
Yes, sorry.
And the individual would have to be pursuing, I'm assuming, something in the arts background?
Yes, and they submit their what the funding is going to. So, and then there's a committee that looks at that to make the decision.
Great. I mean, I think it's great to even increase it. Actually, I'd like to see it be higher if it could be.
Yeah,
because
we
it's so
really
important.
do want to increase
Yeah.
that.
Great.
It's It should be higher.
It's an extremely important thing to have, so thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor O'Keefe, then the mayor.
Thank you. I looked at your annual report.
Yes.
Very nice, thank you. And I was just looking at the financials in there for the year ended 2017. So when will your new financials be available? Are you at the end of your fiscal year? Or?
Yeah.
We're just meeting with the accountants now, and I believe it would be probably in February that we would have that. I'm a incoming treasurer, so I'm still on a learning curve in terms of the timeliness of reporting out. But that we're working with the accountants right now to finalize the information.
And so, is 2017 a fairly typical representation, do you think, of what normally happens? Do you expect any wide variations one way or the other? Was there anything unusual in 2018 that would be different?
The one point that came forward would be the CRD grant.
Right, yeah.
That would be a difference. Other than that, the Sydney Fine Arts Show is not a constant that we know that we will have somewhat funds come through to us. And as I mentioned, the only two programs that we have that are actually funders are the Sydney Fine Arts Show and Artisans. The studio tour is not, it's a cost. We put that on for the artists. They pay a certain fee, but it doesn't really cover everything.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. The organization, you talked about members, and it refers to member groups, and then you were talking about artists. Do you have member groups and individual artists?
Yes, we have member groups.
And roughly the number of groups, the number
I
of artists?
think we probably have 8 member groups. That rings out. Somewhere here, I think I wrote them down. I hope I did.
Well, that's okay. That ballparks it. And is there a large number of individual artists that are members as well?
Yes, and we have what we offer to our members as well is that on the website, there's a space for artists. The one that are joining the Arts Council can have a little mini ad for themselves on there with a photograph of the work they do and a little bit about themselves and contact information. So that is a service that we provide to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want the numbers?
Yeah.
No, I was just curious. I'm sure it's dozens or 200. Wow. That's excellent. I want to touch on the pie chart, which is impressive, and come back to municipal. So when we say the municipal portion, that's Sydney and North Saanich?
Yes.
And North Saanich's contribution in the last year or two has been?
Last year it was 7,500.
Okay, and so the town of Sydney's last year was 15,000.
Mm-hmm.
And CRD's was 3,500.
Yes.
Okay, you spoke of other CRD funding, but that was CRD funding going directly to artist groups, them applying and getting it directly,
yes.
not it going through the...
Yeah, it doesn't go through us. It's just quite a few of the member groups have funding.
Okay, in 2017, the funding from the town of Sydney was $4,500. It was increased by $10,500 to $15,000 last year. Was that similar to this year's request, that it would just in general be strengthening the organization and leadership capacity of the organization? Or did that go to specific things?
It was the general. It was generally for the right.
And again, I'm not speaking from direct experience.
Well, I'm new this year too. So. There you go.
As I understand it, it was spread across to strengthen programming and directed into some of the marketing work, so it was absorbed into the...
Yes, the marketing, yes.
And I believe am I right, that some of it was directed toward the Sydney Fine Arts Show as well?
I don't believe so. Yeah, we can give you that more information.
Okay. Just want to talk about risk of the Sydney Fine Art Show. It's at 34%. Has that risen over time? I mean, this show has had increasing success over the years. So is it now a larger portion than it was? And do you foresee that changing? It just increases your risk if it is an increasing portion of your revenues.
Yes, it is. It is increasing. The amount that I think what we received last year was more than we usually do. That's for sure. It was a very successful show, and going back to what I had said before, is that the intention of the show was not started as a fundraiser. And I think if you were to look at it and say this is a fundraiser, you wouldn't think it was a fundraiser just because there are too many variations in there. It's not the same as setting up a specific. The focus of the show is to bring an amazing art show to the town. And it actually, the early part of the focus of the town was to bring people into the town during a time of the year when there were not very many people. And I think you know the history of the show, and it originally came through from the Business Association of the day, and the Arts Council of the day was not too enthusiastic about it because they could see the risks more than they could see the benefits. And we decided, and I wasn't on the board at that time, but the decision was made to, yes, we'll have that show. And every year it didn't immediately become quite such a generator of funds that it is now that it's got the reputation that it has. I mean, I'm fully confident that the show, the committee right now is working very hard, and I'm sure it'll be a very successful show. It's always wonderful, but the revenue that we get from that show, I don't believe we can put it the same. It's not designed as a fundraiser. That's all.
Okay. Last question is with regards to the sculpture walk, and having come into the role recently, I'm not sure I'm up to date on all the background, but I'm aware that the BIA received a small grant from the town, I think in 2018 or perhaps the year before, to look at the future of the sculpture walk. It of course involves several pieces of sculpture along our waterfront, and those of course involve many different artists. Did the BIA approach the Arts Council in possibly being a champion just because of your connection with artists? In allocating some of your funds or some of the town funding towards? We weren't directly
approached on that. I had mentioned just recently the fact that now we have the screen, that it would make sense to have the map there and have the brochure at the center. But I feel that it would be something that the Arts Council could certainly assist with.
Well, again, one of the connections I think is not only with artists, if you have 200 individual artists as members, but also, the sculpture walk as it was originally envisioned some 8 years ago was that pieces of art on display could be for sale for artists. There has been a little bit of that. But again, the art show has that experience in terms of, selling art, at the show. Mm-hmm. And, that experience I think could be helpful in being connected. So perhaps we can have a future discussion about
I think that would be very positive. Yeah, very positive to have. I know that what we were talking about was we felt it would be good if we had more information at the center about each of the pieces and who the artist was and how much that actual piece was valued at. Maybe a little bit about, so that the artist may not sell that piece, but they may get a commission from that piece. There could be some way. And the signage of the sculpture, the pieces, I think probably needs to be refreshed a bit so that it's really obvious what, I think part of it is, it's kind of a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people. They they feel that, well, this is fabulous. I know we have a new member that joined us this year who's just amazed at that sculpture walk and how beautiful it is. And I agree, it's wonderful. The idea was that the artists would have their work there for a short period of time and hopefully sell it, and then it would be switched out to a new piece. That is going back to the beginning of the plan, which for whatever reason didn't happen. So I think I agree totally that the Arts Council, we will be able to put that, especially on the screen that we now got on the center, to give it more visibility. And I think it would definitely be worth talking about specifically on that point.
Okay, well, we can carry that on. But I'm just thinking, I mean, there's one piece of art now I think is in the $20,000 range. And I mean, the Arts Council collects a commission when it sells art on behalf of artists at the Fine Art Show. So if you were able to, engage the buyer and the seller, of the art, then perhaps that could be some revenue to help support, being a champion for the sculpture walk. So thank you for expressing the interest. And
yeah, it's worth a discussion. And the thing is, we'd have to find people who, because that's in that price point, that's a little out of but we would be able to find some people who could help us with that. When you're talking about marketing major works like that, it's not the same as, I think it's expensive. It's $2,000 or something, but this is far out of that.
yeah. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Hello?
Thank you
Thank
again.
you.
No,
One more. Oh, I thought. Oh.
So I need some help understanding how the $20,000 would be expended. So I know that you talked about strengthening organizational capacity, improved communication, community engagement. Those sound like great things. You talked in the details about that, revamping the website and replacing some outdated computer equipment. So I can see those kind of tangible things. So I'm wondering, in terms of that 20,000, how much is related to those tangible things that I can see, the website and the computer equipment, and how much is related to those other things like organizational capacity? I'm getting the sense that this position is meant to support the board members who don't have the capacity to do these things? Is
you
my
exactly?
analysis?
It's mainly the communications coordinator that we have just brought on board, who has made a huge difference to us. We all the board members work long hours, and we only have so much ability to be able to complete the tasks that we have around the table. And having Kirsten helping us now has been, yes, a huge support for us to be able to then move farther out, we'll be able to open up and deal with more things, and instead of having to deal with one of the things, the communications with our programs and which is our core programs. When I say that, things like, the Sydney Fine Art Show, the studio tour, all of these groups are vital. They have one person as the lead, and they work on their own, but we have made a big effort to, let's try to reach out to them, make sure that if they have a need, that they can talk to us about it. And one of the problems was this is pretty difficult for a board to do. And Kirsten has been able to do that, contacting all of those people and meeting with them on their own, and perhaps having a whole meeting with all of the program leads together. It is a difference with us that we've moved from an operating board to a governance board now. So as a governance board, we're looking at the bigger pictures as to how can we have the funding, how can we ensure that our future is, stabilized. We're not talking about, what color of paper plate should we have at the lunch with our fund, whatever is happening, or a detail to do with the signage on the studio tour. And Kirsten is now working with those groups and actually getting some synergy to happen between them, because quite often they have so much work on their own program, their own passion, I guess you'd want to say, that there's some overlaps there that she's already found that people can work together, that we can maybe work a little bit more efficiently.
So I can certainly sympathize with the challenges of community groups, and in terms of not having enough manpower on your board to get things done. So I've been a part of dozens of groups like that, and it is frustrating when you don't have the capacity. And I guess, you know, one thing that, you know, I've struggled with other groups is in terms of, you know, how much responsibility do members have to step up and take care of some of these things? And I noticed in your report that you talked about looking to expand the capacity on your board to take on different things. So, you know, when we go to taxpayers to say, we want $20,000 more, I have to ask the question, you know, what are the members doing to kind of step up themselves? And if they're not, is that fair to ask the taxpayers to fund a position to do something that members aren't willing to step up and do?
Okay, so as far as the board is concerned, most of the members on the board, all of them pretty well work almost a full time. It's quite surprising how much we do.
That's pretty common.
And that's pretty common. And then underneath there, we have the programs, and each one of those programs, like the Sydney Fine Arts Show committee, all of those committees are working hard. And the position that Kirsten is taking on is developing that synergy to be the person who's there, who can, and let's look at some of the ways that we can improve how we're working. And I agree that we are probably not the only volunteer organization that works long hours, but we definitely, all of our board members work. All we have for our support is a part-time office administrator at the center, and we have a part-time bookkeeper up until finding Kirsten. So we had very little ability, and as a result of that, things drop because there isn't someone there to work together and make this a cohesive group. And yes, so we decided that is something that we need in order to stay, being able to just exist.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess.
And I understand your point too, and I know it feels to people think, oh, you've got this, but it's a part-time person, and she's working very hard the time that she bills. Thanks.
Okay. Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on then to our next item. This is not a presentation. We've had a response from the Shaw Center for the Saanich Sea with additional information following up on their budget presentation. So that's being distributed. I don't know if there's any discussion about it, and if not, I'm looking for a motion to receive.
I would move receipt.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Thank you for the additional information.
Okay, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And now on to our final presentation by Andrew Hissick, our Director of Corporate Services. This is preliminary discussions and additional budget notes.
Mr. Chair. Last meeting, you received a lot of information from me. I'm going to try not to repeat very much, just highlight on a few new items and maybe a little more information on what you've heard before. Tonight's agenda will be a brief recap of where we stand, some of the major tax impacts, one very minor change to the draft budget. And then following that recap, I'm hoping we can go through the different areas of the budget one by one, being the utilities, supplemental items, and capital, primarily the tax funded. And then it can go wherever council wants it to go. Very quick recap of where we are. We're at stage 2 of our 3-stage process. Tonight will be an opportunity to discuss and clarify the budget that was presented to you. It will be an opportunity for the public to provide input. Staff reports, there's only one very lengthy report on your agenda. Hopefully it made sense and provided more clarity. Following this, we have the next stage, which is scheduled for 3 weeks tomorrow, where hopefully we can put this thing to bed and get on with another year of providing services. Early on last time, I told you what our starting point was, and it still is at 5.95. But that includes all of the new requests that have been made by some of the organizations that you heard from tonight, as well as at the last meeting. So over 2 meetings, we've spent nearly 3 hours hearing from 5 groups that have budget requests for 2019. They're all very legitimate, and they all presented very good cases, and council asked an excellent series of questions, so no one can say that you're not doing your due diligence as part of considering these. The one change to highlight is the Chamber of Commerce has decreased their request by $8,000 from 28 to 20, as outlined in your agenda package. That doesn't necessarily mean a reduction to the 5.95 yet, due to the complexities around the Economic Development Fund that are outlined in your report. Just to reiterate the key impacts on the tax increase, we've had an additional $236,000 requested for capital. Reserve contributions are growing as they do by policy every year. Debt servicing is an impact of just over 1% of taxes as we continue to phase in the CSB borrowing. The employer health tax is another 1.1%, and that's a provincial mandate that we have no control over. Supplemental request, that's another 1.5% or so, and the RCMP contract is going up by $50,000.
Go ahead. Through the chair. Just while we're on this slide, can you remind myself at least, and perhaps for the benefit of the audience, the sum that represents a 1% increase in tax? And we can relate it better to some of these increases.
It's about $113,000.
Okay. So does that, if we sum those totals there, does that come to the 5.95?
Yeah, it pretty much does.
Thank you.
This is one that you saw last time, but I want to keep as many charts in as possible for council's amusement. So it shows where the tax dollars are spent. So the biggest chunk is for police protection at 18.4%, followed by public works at just under 17%. And debt servicing is under 4%, even with the increase for the CSB. In terms of how we fund our general fund, this is everything but water and sewer. So 68% comes from property taxes. That's why when we have a budgetary impact, the most likely source for that is taxation, because our other sources are rather limited. Fees and charges account for only 15%. Government transfer is less than 10%, and 3 other very small chunks, but more than 2/3 of our funding for the general fund is from taxation. One thing I didn't highlight last time, which I'm going to this time, is the growth in community support that the town budget has seen over the last number of years. So this includes funding for our community partners like Mary Winspear, the museum, the Shaw Center. Sorry for using the old acronym, but you know what I mean. As well as for economic development initiatives over the years. So over the last 4 years, it's grown over 260,000, so that's over 2.5% in taxes. Same information in pretty colors, but it just shows how dramatic the increase has been over the years. Where at 931,000, that represents about 7.6% of our net operating budget. Now, the ED fund, this is covered in your reports as well, but I just thought I'd clarify a bit more by why I mentioned last time that not all the requests can be accommodated from existing budgets. So our base funding that we set over the last number of years is $100,000. And according to past practice, we've also carried forward unused funding for the next year. So our starting point is about 145.6 for this year. If you subtract from that the commitments we've already made, so the second half of the BIA pilot, event liaison and event supplement, which is by contract with the BIA, a small amount of EDC commitments, and I fear that might not quite be enough in terms of licensing for things they've committed to. So then our unallocated balance, if you will, is about 84. So when you look at the potential ways we can allocate that, we've got SIP at 26.7, we've got the chamber at 20,000, and we have the SBIA in year one of their request at 50,000. So if all those three are approved as presented, then we're looking at a net overage in the ED fund of about $13,000 in year one. This would go up to about 32,000 next year as the BIA proposal increases slightly. So,
so that 12 would actually go to that other slide in terms of new increases. That would be the amount of new increases. That went with the slide with RCMP and other.
Oh,
much earlier.
you mean back here. So.
Or no, sorry, there is some in the supplemental request.
Okay, yeah. As I tried to explain, it's not so black and white between what's supplemental and what's EDC because, you know, it's it all depends. If it could all be accommodated from the ED fund, then that supplemental number would decrease, and then the core budgetary increase would increase.
Going back to the slide you were at
Mm-hmm.
for just a moment, please. So in that middle space under commitments, were there other payouts, if you will, from the ED Economic Development Fund last year for one time?
There were various programs and initiatives undertaken by the EDC, such as attendance at the BC Economic Development Conference, some communications initiatives like the website and so on. So that can be itemized, but I don't have the entire breakdown right now.
Okay, so nothing else that was out of the fund last year that we would expect to repeat.
The only things are potentially BC EDA membership as well as licensing for the pedestrian counters and possibly a component of the website.
And my recollection was that some of the grants applications that came in for grants and aid were funded out of the Economic Development Fund. So
Yeah.
we may be seeing some of those come forward again.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, Councillor Wainwright. There were some requests funded from the ED fund, and we do have requests potentially coming back, like the Literary Festival, which is every 2 years, as well as Folk and Fiddle. But both of those would likely be under a repayable scenario if they make their funding levels.
Okay.
Sorry, go
So,
ahead.
Yeah.
Question regarding SBIA on that particular slide, and I'm reading on page 28 and 23, sorry, my eye, and it's says that the funding for years 2 to 5 would increase to $65,000 annually, and it's not showing as representative up there. Is there a reason for that?
You'll have to excuse me because some of the external requests this year have been a different follow the bouncing ball scenario, and they're constantly changing. But this iteration right here is the most recent, so it's really a 2-year proposal with the understanding that they'd likely come back for the remainder of the BIA mandate, which is another 2 years beyond that. And it's likely would at that level with potentially an inflationary increase, but I can't speak for them right now.
Actually, a supplemental question while the people from the Chamber of Commerce are here. The 20,000 request that's put in, is that a 1 year only, or is it likely that you would, or would you like to see that carry on in subsequent years?
It's initially a 1 year request because, as most of you are aware, that identical request went to all 3 municipalities, and we thought the correct way to handle that would be to keep that option undeclared. We don't really know what the reception is going to be amongst the 3 municipalities.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
In regards to the commitments, so I'm looking specifically at the SBIA event liaison and the event supplement. And I know I asked you about this, but I'm still trying to understand it. So we're locked into that for how long? A year or 2, or
4 more years.
4
It
more
goes
years.
with the mandate of the BIA, which is renewed every 5 years at this point.
Oh, okay, because they were sort of supplemental to the amounts they already get from the levy. I thought it was something different.
Just going back to the inception of that agreement, it came at a time when the town was under pressure to hire an internal events coordinator on staff. So we found a great compromise with the SBIA where we would provide them with some funding and they would match it. And that's what led to SIAG, which is one of our most successful community programs over the last number of years. So it was actually a way to save money and not hire an additional staff member to get into this agreement with them.
I was just wondering about it because I recall that in their presentation, the SBIA mentioned, I think when we were asking about what capacity they might have to take on some of these other roles, is that they indicated that SIAG is pretty well running itself, and so whoever was doing that was going to move over. And so it just led me to think, is that funding still required, or could it be repurposed into something where there is more of a need, I guess?
I'm not sure it's quite as cut and dried as they have very limited personnel. They've got 2 full-time employees and a bunch of, again, volunteer work by the board. And they use some of this funding to hire different people for different community events, especially the event supplement portion. So I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for them entirely, but I don't think it's necessarily that one position has gone beyond this mandate. I think they're still generalists. They do everything that they have to do on behalf of not only the membership, but the town through the agreements we have, including the visitor information services. Okay. So we covered this last time as well, but just to reiterate that there's quite a large amount of surplus funding as a balancing mechanism in our budget. So in effect, there's $350,000, which is over 3% in taxes that I'm bringing out of accumulated surplus so that we avoid overtaxing on the basis that we will likely generate some savings or additional revenues through the year and will eventually break even. And this has worked really well in the past, and while we're not finished with 2018's year end, it's looking like we did just about break even and we won't have to dip into the $300,000 we had last year out of surplus.
Sarah, a question one might ask is, if you made that figure 450,000 or 400, you would reduce the taxes by 1%.
That's true, but we do fairly careful calculations at the end of each fiscal year to see what our excess is. And like I mentioned, we're not quite at the end of 2018, but if we do just about break even, so given our policy level and what we have committed to the CSB, which is another 600,000 or so, we wouldn't have the extra 100,000 to throw at the budget unless we were going to make it up in future years, and that is possible. And just to reiterate, it's a council policy, so you can change how much we maintain.
I guess I asked the question, knowing the answer, but I think for the public to know that while the surplus is much higher than that, it is a careful balancing act in terms of what you can take in a given year to apply to the budget, and it's not as simple as let's take another 200 and lower the taxes by 2%. So.
Yeah, thank you. And just the last point is we're being extra careful right now because until the CSB funding has been completed later this year, I just don't want to commit anything until we're in a very safe situation with that. So once we've applied a certain level of surplus, it's really down to the property tax funding, and we saw what a big proportion of our overall funding that is. So the tax increase is mitigated, first of all, by growth in the tax base, and then whatever is remaining, which this year is 5.95, is generally applied evenly across all the different property classes.
Just for the benefit of the audience, really, or people maybe watching the video, when he talks about increase in the tax base, he's talking about the value of new construction, not that the average home has gone up by 20% assessment.
Thank you for clarifying, Councillor. I'm so used to just putting it out there that I do require that reminder every now and then. So yes, the increase in assessments is the average increase is factored out in our rate setting, so that if it goes up 20%, if your assessment goes up 20, then we would lower our tax rate by an equivalent amount so that we're collecting the same as last year, and then only the ultimate tax impact, which is currently at 5.95, is then applied to that. And it's only properties that have a greater than average increase that would see a greater increase than the general population. So again, to reiterate from last week, our total increase in tax revenues is 875,000, but 200 of that is coming from the growth in the tax base, leaving about 675 as a tax increase. And this you saw last time as well. It just breaks down what the impacts are, and it's showing that the core budget went up by about 6.24%. Incremental items, being the supplementals, went up by another 1.47. That was offset by 200,000 in tax base growth, leaving the bottom line. And there's your 1% number of 113,536. And each 1% tax increase represents about $1.20 a month for the average household. So when we talk about 5.95%, that would equate to about $85 for the year, or about $7 a month. So here it is again. Municipal taxes would go up by about $85. We're also proposing a $15 increase between water and sewer parcel taxes, taking the total increase to about $100, which is about $830 a month for the average person. This is an important distinction here. When you look at on the tax notice, we collect for all the different jurisdictions, like the province for school taxes, regional government, library, and so on. So for the residential taxpayer, only about 53% of what you pay stays in Sydney. Like this is before the homeowner grant. So for most people, that school portion will be reduced or eliminated entirely. But before the HOG, it's only about half your taxes that stay right here for our services. Now, it's different for commercial. It's actually a lower proportion of commercial taxes that stay within the jurisdiction. So about 1/3 of the total taxes paid by commercial property go to the province, and commercial properties don't get a homeowner grant. Sure, it's tax deductible for them, but still, it's a big impact.
Go ahead.
Through the chair.
Could you use the microphone?
Through the chair, could you give a ballpark figure of what percentage or the dollar value of residential taxes and the dollar value of commercial taxes? Either past year or anticipated this year?
For the average,
No, just the total sum.
sorry, I
That's
can't
okay.
off the top of my head. I'll look it up later.
Fair enough. Yep.
But the important thing with this distinction here is that we have far less control over the total tax bill for a commercial property than we do for residential property. And we'll get into this in a lot more detail when we're looking at the tax rates bylaw, as well as our tax policy review that we're going to start fairly soon. So for a commercial property, to lobby government to reduce that tax multiple, it's really the other jurisdictions that have a much greater impact than the provincial multiple does. I do like to touch a little bit about the other 4 years of the current financial plan. And this is a typical look at what we go in with. So it tends to be front-ended. So we're looking at a bigger increase in year 1 of the plan. It's much more palatable in years 2 and 3. In years 4 and 5, we're actually right now projecting a small decrease, but the latter years tend to be understated. Things like supplemental items, we don't tend to look 5 years out for the one-time item. It's just the ongoing. And even with the capital plan, you'll see that the first 3 years have a higher level of tax funding than the latter 2. And this is something we can smooth out as we go through this process. But any change you make in year 1 will have an incremental impact going forward. So if it's a smaller increase this year and no changes are made to next year's increase will go up because the base is smaller. This is something I like to touch on every year as well, how our tax increases compare with inflation, because some people like to use inflation as some kind of artificial ceiling on taxes. So over the last 5 years, it's been a little unusual where our taxes have been fairly close or under inflation. If you look at the last 5 years cumulatively, CPI has gone up by 8.3%, and right now we're looking at 12.9% if the full tax impact is approved, which I don't think it will be. A couple of comments about that. The general inflation, CPI, is not really the best measure for us because it's not really our basket of goods. And more importantly, the CPI does not allow for additions to the basket of goods. It's basically the cost for the very same stuff you bought last year, where we're always considering and adding new services, whether it be full-time firefighters, additional policing, or more help to our community organizations.
If I may, through the chair, Andrew, you indicate in the package that was circulated to council that this is the 10th year in a row that there's not been a general inflationary increase to all areas of the budget.
Right.
So, I mean, you're using this, I guess, as an analogy to show what the increase has been like, but you're stating within the package that we received that department managers have had a 0% increase, not referring to a capital program, obviously, but their operational budget. Is that correct?
What I mean to say there is that as a starting point, it's a 0%. We start with the previous year's budget, and we ask them to only increase where absolutely necessary. So, not to say they haven't increased at all, but it's not across the board. It's just only where required. And at the last meeting, I provided a table that showed how the various functional areas have gone up and down over the last 4 years, and it depends on the level of supplementals as well as shifting priorities for council and for staff.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Through the chair to Andrew, when was the last time we increased other types of fees, permit services, and how much of an impact does that have? So, I don't know, parking tickets, dog license fees. I don't know what all the other myriad of things were, but when was the last time we did a review of those in terms of increases?
Well, it's an ongoing review. We can't do everything every year, so we try and cycle through everything. Although, having said that, there are some fees that really are way overdue for a review. One major change we made last year was in our connection fees for utilities, and that was far too long without an increase, and that should help going forward. Things like parking permit fees, that's been about 4 years. Building permit fees, we did look at that a while back, and we've adopted a very common methodology that's used throughout the region and provincially. So it is on our radar to constantly cycle through our fees and charges, but because it's such a small chunk of the pie, it's not going to have a big impact.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, CPI, it doesn't account for changes in service level. It doesn't account for non-discretionary items like the increases to the RCMP contract, things like the health services tax. And we also have to face increases that are deferred or accumulating in previous years, like the infrastructure deficit, where we try and put more aside into our reserves to deal with that backlog. And things like incurring debt to pay for buildings from time to time. So we've only had 2 increases above 3% over the last 15 years. And the biggest one was 5% in 2009. And that just happened to be the first year of a different council's term. So it does happen that way, unfortunately, sometimes. But generally, we've kept to under 3%, and only one other time did we go above that.
Andrew, if I may, through you, the chair. On that last slide, you just, there was a comment on the bottom about increasing park space and hiring of park staff. I'm looking at page 23, the supplemental items in public works, the additional downtown cleaning. And it states here supplemented by internal shifting of resources. And there's a $5,000 cost to that. If it's a shifting, where is that cost coming from?
That's really part of that table I was just talking about, where the functions tend to trade off budgets from year to year. So it might be a movement of personnel budgets from parks to public works to account for it, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, we're going to get to potential reduction strategies as we move along here. And just to reiterate from last time, the most likely sources for that are capital projects funded from taxation, as well as supplemental items. So these are new things, if you will. So things that either have been requested internally or externally, or staff responses to council or public input through the capital budget. You might ask, why not the operating budget for reductions? It's because of that surplus funding I was talking about earlier. So because we use $350,000 to minimize the tax impact, if we reduce the operating budget, I'd want to reduce the amount of surplus to offset that, because I'd no longer have confidence that we generate that level of savings. That's my recap, maybe a little longer than I had hoped, but good questions along the way. So may I suggest that we go through it in this order? We focus on the utility budgets first, then maybe move on to the supplemental requests, tax-funded capital, potentially look at other capital, general operations if you wish, or any other changes to the budget that you want to discuss. But I would suggest starting with utility, if that's okay.
I'm not seeing any objections, so go ahead.
Okay. So the water operating fund, as you know, is funded by parcel taxes and user fees. It's mainly for the bulk purchase of water from the CRD, as well as the maintenance of the distribution system. The parcel tax has been stable since 2012, and the user fees since 2011. So in this budget year, because we are less and less able to absorb the cost increases on bulk water, I'm proposing a $5 increase in the annual parcel tax, which is collected on the tax notice, up to $65, and an increase in the user rate to $6.50 per unit. And as I've mentioned, the water and sewer rate structures are currently under review, and we'll be bringing more information to council throughout the year. But it's looking very much like some increases will be required, so I don't feel comfortable putting it off anymore. On the sewer side, it's primarily our share of the unified treatment plant and the operation of the collection system. Again, it's funded by parcel taxes and user fees, and the parcel taxes are double for a single-family residence as they are for a strata unit. So it's a two-phase rate, and they've been stable for 3 years now. User fees have been unchanged since 2015. I'm not proposing any change to the user fees this year, but I am proposing a $10 and $5 increase to parcel taxes. The biggest reason for this is a big increase in capital replacement costs over the last few years, as well as projections for the future, and about a $60,000 impact in our share of the unified treatment plant for 2019.
Just for the committee, I guess, we can in fact make motions tonight if the committee so desires. Those would be recommendations to council. However, there really is not a need to make any motions. So for example, if you felt like recommending approval of these two particular budgets, one could do so. And I'm not really going to encourage you to go that direction. However, if you're happy with the information, if there are no items that you want to discuss, it's useful to perhaps provide direction to Andrew not to bring these slides back at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. I would be quite happy to entertain.
Go ahead.
Just have one question.
Sure.
23 cents per 1,000 liters of water. What is the average, if we have that information, average household using thousands of liters per year? Just wondering how much that's going to impact over the course of a year.
It's not going to be significant. It's really difficult to state an average because there's so much fluctuation. We still have a minimum quarterly charge in place, which will remain unchanged for the time being. So for a very low-level user, they're just paying the minimum of $25 a quarter. But I could potentially come up with an estimate of the impact on.
I could just look at my own bills, I guess, and do the math and figure people are like me.
It's really, because it's so user-based, it's based on consumption.
Yeah.
It really is in the user's hands to try and reduce it for their household.
Fair enough.
If I may, I'll make a motion that we have the information we require for the utility budget.
I'm not sure we really need a motion like that.
Okay.
Because, but I think that staff have heard you, and if there's no dissent among the committee, staff won't bring forward these utility budget slides at the next meeting. Go ahead.
I would prefer that they be brought forward. It won't take much time.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough. And did you want any particular information to supplement what I've given you on utilities? Aside from Councillor Garnett's question? Hearing none.
I will say that I'm leaning towards approving the recommendations that are being presented, and I guess I'm wondering if anyone around the table is thinking otherwise, because we could have a discussion about that.
Thank you. I'm not. I'm aligned with that thinking, but I'm also interested in the opportunity for members of the public to comment following this presentation. So I agree with the mayor that it would be nice to see this come back again.
Okay.
Okay, it shall return.
Moving on.
Moving on to supplemental requests. So, as you know, these are one-time or ongoing additions to the budget, sometimes to service levels, studies, new staffing, external requests, that kind of thing. And our practice is to include all the requests in the base budget, so that instead of adding things on after the fact, we go in with a worst case, if you will, and anything that isn't approved comes out. I find through experience it's a little less confusing than trying to go up and down as we go. So you know where we start, and if there's anything you don't want to include, then it comes out. So all items have been described in your binders to some level, and we've had very thorough presentations from 5 of the requesting groups. Your report in the agenda also covers some of the items. So the bigger items are the OCP review, which is $100,000 over 2 years. The Shaw Center is asking for $60,000 in 2019, and going up to $140,000 in year 2 onwards. And as with the BIA, you do have the option of approving these requests for a set period as opposed to their full requested time frame, and just seeing whether the goals that they're trying to accomplish are being met before giving them permanent funding. The BIA is asking for $50,000, as you know. Next biggest item is the Ray Creek Dam assessment. Chamber and Artsy both asking for $20,000. Artsy being ongoing, Chamber, as you heard, one time for now, and a number of other smaller items totaling $71,000. The total impact is over $300,000, but when you deduct the one-time 2018s, it's about half of that. Excuse me. So if you have any questions or motions on any of these supplemental items, or the smaller ones?
Thank you. If I may, Andrew, does this come under, we've got the Talista building assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other information regarding the status of that building? Because we're looking at an assessment of $5,000, and we're also looking at painting of $4,000. If the building has a limited time, is that question in this part here, is that?
Yeah, this is the time, yes.
Okay.
So there is a $5,000 item for assessing the status of that building, not just the Artsy component, but the washrooms as well as the picnic shelter. So we are going to confirm that we believe the Artsy building only has a 5-year remaining life, but we want to do a bit more investigation just to confirm that. And it does include those other elements as well. The separate item for painting is just similar to the signage they've done, just to pretty up the appearance inside and out, just to create a better impression for visitors and try and attract more people to it. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just further to that, I wonder if it would make more sense just to put off the painting until we do the assessment. Because if we're going to assess the building's not, we shouldn't stay in the building, then why would we paint it?
It's the kind of maintenance that could help to not just make it more palatable, but just maybe perhaps increase the lifespan just through the maintenance done, especially on the exterior. So they are there for another 5 years. Their agreement was just renewed in 2018. It's something they've asked for to just make it a nicer, more attractive building.
So one question I guess I would throw out to staff and to committee is whether we're actually allocating enough for the OCP review. And I guess I'm a bit concerned in that a comprehensive OCP review undertaken in other communities has cost more than that. One of the things I'm considering, though, is that if at the end of this year we find that the project is probably bigger than planned, we would simply increase the amount next year.
That is how we see it happening. I think 60,000 in addition to the 20,000 that's grant funded for the housing needs assessment will be a great start in 2019. And by the time we're here discussing it next year, we should have a better idea of whether it's a sufficient budget. We do plan on doing a little more in-house now that the reorganization and planning has occurred following the former director's departure. So the planning figure was bigger before that reorg happened. It's just, we want to see what we can accomplish.
Okay. Go ahead.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to also indicate, so we are anticipating, we don't want to presuppose perhaps what the scale of the OCP review will be, but we're anticipating that it'll be close to a comprehensive review, not necessarily a complete rewrite as well. So we realize that council's still going through its strategic planning, and we need to make a determination on the overall scope and scale of the OCP review, but we know it'll be relatively significant, so yeah.
Okay. And go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew, the item in supplemental for town hall energy audit, $10,000. There are also references in the budget to roof replacement, HVAC replacement. Is there somewhere a study that's been done that you can enlighten us on or direct us to around the life expectancy of the building itself, and what sort of study's been done on that to help determine, for budgeting purposes, how much we're investing in this building?
There have been roof assessments done over the years, which is what we're basing our replacement on for next year. There's also a 30,000 item in the 2020 budget for civic site analysis, where we're going to look at our various buildings and just do a bit of planning around remaining lifespan, what has to be done to keep them going for that and potentially a longer time frame.
And I beg your pardon, that would include this building, that study?
It would. So there would be some analysis done and then potentially some engagement as to which of our buildings are perhaps considered most important by the community in terms of keeping exactly as or where they are.
Okay, thank you.
And the energy audit has to do, as you surmise, with that HVAC and roof replacement. We're wanting to do that in the most efficient way possible, and if there's any potential of deferring that beyond next year. We're gonna try and do that, but we can only do it for so long. I mean, we would love to get a new building here, but it's not very likely without some kind of partnership through development. So we do have to spend some money to make sure that the roof lasts over our heads.
Go ahead.
Are we allowed to touch on ongoing requests as well, or just one-time ones?
Anything you like,
Anything you
but perhaps before,
Um,
I'm sorry.
Reverting back to the EDC and the funding, and I'm going over if we allot all the money that people are asking. I'm curious to hear what other people on the committee think. I'm not comfortable with going over, so given that there might be some things that come up with the Economic Development Committee, other requests, I think we need to have some kind of buffer in there in case that happens and not add to an already overshooting the amount. So do we want to approach how we're going to look at that, or is everybody comfortable with going over? And just, does anybody else have an opinion on that, or am I the only one that's thinking that's a bad idea?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, with 3 new presentations this evening, I'd like to consider the new information and the new information received from Shaw before discussing presenting my particular views on those.
Fair
But I appreciate the concern, and I'm sure we'll have a more fulsome discussion.
Okay. Thanks.
I'll just weigh in on it. I think obviously everyone needs time to think about it, and we probably are going to get input from the public as they're seeing the presentations here tonight. We may get some of that input tonight. We may get it later on. Personally, I'm not leaning towards approving all of those economic development related requests. I won't be specific about what I'm not, what's on my hit list, as it were. But I appreciate that 5.95 is not something that I would be comfortable with, and we've got to find reductions somewhere. So it will be challenging. One thing I would throw out for the committee as a whole is it would be useful to have some idea, and I'm sure staff would appreciate this, of the magnitude of a cut from that 5.95. Like, to throw out the leading question, would you be comfortable with a 4% increase? If committee feels strongly that it's got to come in under 2%, I think we need to schedule a few more budget meetings. The thing is that at the moment I don't have any feel for what my colleagues are thinking, and we will need to kind of get on the same page. So I'm not sure if people are comfortable discussing that, or you need to think about it more. Go ahead.
I'm comfortable discussing it. I've been writing down kind of the percentages to look at that, but I feel like Andrew was going to say something. Do you need to say your thing before we continue our discussion? No? Okay.
No.
No.
Never invite me to say anything.
I'm looking at what we have in that 5.95%, and I see employer health tax, we can't cut that. RCMP, we can't cut it. Debt repayments, I don't want to cut that. And that right there brings us to 2.5. Reserve is 0.5. There we are 3. So to get down to 3, we have to cancel all the increases in capital, which doesn't seem like a good idea, seeing as we've already seen we have an infrastructure deficit. Supplemental requests are only 1.5%. So even if we cut every single supplemental request, we're not getting below 4.
I saw some hands this way.
Thank you. In regards to Councillor Garnett's comment about the EDC funding, I also feel like we need to hear from the public, their thoughts on that. And I guess my inclination is, in the notes it was mentioned that we would have to increase by 12,000 if we did everything. I'm not inclined to go ahead and approve things just because traditionally they've always put $100,000 towards EDC. So unless the proposal makes sense and has value to the community, I'm not going to approve something just because it fits within that 100,000. If we go, I see us going through the process, looking at those things to see what has value, and if it only ends up being 50,000 or 40,000, then that's sort of my thinking. Also, as Councillor Duncan pointed out, I also looked at, there's some critical things there that we have pretty well no discretion over. So it seems to me, if 4% would seem to be even a stretch to get to.
Go ahead.
Just to follow on what Councillor O'Keefe was saying, I think this is an opportunity because we're looking at a large increase in this draft budget. This is an opportunity to look at those things that we have been funding and that have come up for, and to say, what value is this bringing to our community, and for the community then to turn around and say, this is what we feel, we need to hear from you sooner rather than later. This is going to be a tough one. We don't have the gas taxes, which have in the years past sort of tampered down our increase, so it's going to be a tough nut this year. But I think at the end, we can come out with a good budget that gives the community value. Right off the top, we've got the OCP. I don't think that's negotiable. There's no way that that's negotiable, and that takes a big chunk out of this year and next year's budget. So I think we do need to give this a little bit more thought as a council and see what kind of a number we can come up with that makes sense.
Go ahead.
As been just said, I would like to hear from the public, whether it's tonight or in the coming couple of weeks before we conduct those deliberations starting on Tuesday, February 26th. If through the chair, if I might request you go back to the slide with the EDC, Economic Development, EDC slide. So just a clarification again, that we saw a slide earlier tonight, about 5 slides before this, that showed where the 5.95% increase came from, and we've mentioned the MSP and the OCP and those other factors. The Economic Development Fund, when we see it at the top, $100,000, and the carry forward 45, that's in the budget. That isn't new. That isn't supplemental. That isn't new taxes this year. And so when we see the allocations down below, they actually fit what was previously allocated in the budget. The net balance of ED fund at the bottom, $12,815. If we approved all of the requests that we see on that, the SIP, the Chamber of Commerce, and the BIA, then that would be $12,815 of new taxes, which is 0.1%. So I appreciate that we have, there's flexibility in terms of that being able to be cut or not spent, but appreciate that was economic development funding was put into the budget, I think starting about 8 years ago, with the intention that was important for the community, and while it might be the easy place to cut, I think we need to give it careful consideration.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yep.
I think this is an important discussion. May I suggest that after we get through the capital section, we might revisit it near the end of the meeting, and if nothing else, just to give staff an idea of what you want us to come back to you with in addition to what comments or motions you've made today.
Yep. We'll let Andrew continue with his presentation.
Are we happy with supplementals? Can we move to capital? Sorry. Might work quicker if I pointed at the actual device. So the capital budget, it totals $8 million for 2019 without the CSB carry forward. And $3 million of that is replacement plan projects. The capital funding, you saw this slide last time. More than half comes from reserves. Another just under $1 million comes from gas tax. Developer contributions, primarily for the underground wiring project. Debt of $600,000 for Ray Creek Dam. And taxes and user fees, $476, with property taxes being just under $400,000 of that. So the level of tax funding for 2019 capital is $391,000, which is $236,000, or roughly 2% more than last year. So we've now used up the available gas tax for another 2.5 years, but there is more coming up in year 3 of this budget. So the average annual funding going back 10 years was higher than this, but our new normal seems to be in the 300 range, where we've had more of a reliance on internal and reserve funding, and the gas tax has certainly helped in that regard. Just to give you a better idea of where we stand with gas tax, so we're beginning 2019 with just under 1.2 million in the bank. We're getting another 560,000 this year from the feds. Capital funding included in our capital plan is 1.5. There's 119,000 in operating that is primarily for studies, leaving an ending balance this year at the projected ending balance of 163,000. So if you look at 2020, we're actually projecting to be a little bit in the hole, but because not everything in our budget gets completed in the year we initiate, I'm expecting that we'll break even for 2020. But then you get to 2021 and all of our committed funding for various projects are complete, so we have a projected 328,000 to allocate to new projects at council's discretion, and there's very little allocated in 2022 and 3, so that you're looking at another 1.4 million within the time frame of this 5-year plan. What I will be doing with this new council is I'll bring forward a report on the gas tax, likely next year, maybe this year if we have time for it, just showing what the eligibility criteria are. And what I did with the last council was I brought that forward and I asked them to let me know how much of this do you want to set aside for longer term projects like sea level rise, and how much do you want to use today? Well, you see where we are. It's pretty much all been committed to try and keep taxes down, but I'll ask the same question of the new council. How much do you want to allocate to ongoing projects, recurring projects? How much do you want to allocate towards the longer term stuff? And maybe we'll find a different balance.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, so that figure, capital funding as per above, the almost 5 million, can you speak to what that is funding in 2019?
I'll point to the page in your document.
Yeah, well, just for the public's.
It's on page 79 of the budget binder. So it lists all the capital projects funded by gas tax and itemizes the total on operating. And if you look at the listing of supplemental items, it'll tell you which operating items are gas tax funded.
Okay, so for the public's benefit, the 3 largest allocations are 500,000 to the community safety building, 132,000 to the McDonald Park Road sidewalk, 390,000 to the downtown employee parking lot, which is just completing now. Will be paved later in the month, and 240,000 to the bike path on the west side of the highways. So we're familiar with the Gallerin neighborhood, and so we have a paved pathway currently on highway lands, but the town of Sydney takes care of that, and so that's going to be redone this year. So some sizable investments in the community.
What we've used it on generally is we have replacement reserves for replacing what infrastructure we have, and we've used gas tax to add to that inventory. So infill sidewalk projects, certain park improvements, and yes, as you mentioned, the two biggest uses have been the employee parking lot as well as an allocation to the CSB. In 2020, I should say, the biggest use is on Bevan Pier, and that's another $500,000 to redo the coatings on that pier. And these are things we don't have internal reserves for right now, so if we want to get them done without a tax impact, that was your source. And I didn't mean to imply that they weren't at all viable projects that were important to the community, just this council might choose to have a different focus of short-term versus longer-term. So as I mentioned a couple of times, and in the staff report, if you look at the tax-funded capital, that's the most likely source of savings. So what we do each and every year is we break it out into annual recurring programs like you see at the top here. Some projects carried forward, and if you look at the big ticket item, it's the RCMP boiler replacement, which council pre-approved in late 2018. And that contract was awarded at the last meeting last week. These are our new capital projects, and what staff tend to do is we listen to council and the community throughout the year, and we also have some internal ideas for improvements or for adding to our capacity. But having said that, not all of these are must-have projects. We've got a list here of about 10 or 12 projects, and I look at Beacon Wharf repairs, the top item, the biggest item. That, I would say, is the only must-have on this list. Things like the First Street sidewalk, that's another infill project that we felt was important enough to not wait until gas tax was available, but it could easily be deferred to a future year.
Andrew, the library front entrance sidewalks, that isn't, I'm wondering if we've approached North Saanich about cost sharing that, because they're still sharing the library with us, and that's how you get from the parking lot into the building.
As it stands right now, our agreement with North Saanich on the library expires in 2020, so they've pretty much made it clear that just status quo for now. But if they come back to us next year or maybe later this year wanting an extension to that agreement while they explore their own branch, perhaps that opens the door to asking for some capital funding. And it might be worth asking the question now, looking forward to next year.
Yeah, their pursuit of a new branch at Panorama seems to be on hold. I don't know if it's. I'm sure that they're going to continue to try to pursue that, but even if it were to get approved quickly, it'll take them a while to get a construction contract and get the thing built. Would seem to me that the sidewalk to the entrance of the building probably is worth approaching them about.
Through the chair, having attended a recent Panorama Rec Commission meeting, the North Saanich gave an update to the commission because the consideration North Saanich is giving to a new library branch would be on current Panorama Recreation lands, which North Saanich owns and leases currently to Panorama Recreation. So the lease is actually expired and is on a month-to-month. North Saanich is currently waiting for their request through the Agricultural Land Commission to withdraw the land that the new library would be on from the commission. So they don't have a timeline when they will get that answer, and then they'll consider their way forward after after getting that information. So I agree with Councillor Wainwright, given I think there are going to be at least, there's going to be some time delay while they're awaiting that decision, and then there would be additional decisions to be made one way or the other that the worst we could get is a no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Continue.
Okay, so having heard that many of these are not must-haves, if council wished to get a head start on reducing the tax impact, now would be a potentially good time.
Go ahead.
Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, please, through the chair, if you could just elaborate on two items. The event tent and chairs and the Eastview Park seating improvements in terms of some context. And we did tour as new councillors the RCMP cell blocks, and I can assure you that was my first visit to the premises. I thought the paint looked like it was in pretty good order. So if you could chat about those two for me, please.
Okay. For the RCMP project, they came forward last year with a 5-year list of remedial projects on the building. It is nearing 20 years old, so there's just some touch-ups, but I can ask again how critical this is. We have tried to spread those costs out over 4 or 5 years, but if this was deferred, I don't think they would suffer too much. But at the same time, they are coming at us with new requests all the time for minor improvements to things like the cell blocks. So these are items that are cost shared with North Saanich and the province. As for the event tent and chairs, I'll defer to the manager of operations.
Yeah, through the chair, these were items that came out of conversations with past council on some of the events that we've been holding in Sydney. One was for a 20 by 20 marquee, and then some event chairs for spectators. Certainly, the council of the day felt the need to support some of these activities, the paddleboard competition, the Oprah Water rowing race, certainly the Sydney Days activities in Iroquois Parks. We've had the occasion to borrow some of those items from Mary Winspear, and with the increased amount of events that they have, the probability of us using a 20 by 20 marquee is a little bit unknown at this particular point in time. So it was thought that we'd put it in as a budget item. If we saw that the event activities were happening, this was another way for the town to support these types of events in our local parks and public spaces.
And if I can, through the chair to staff, was the intent that there's a cost recovery there, or this was in order to encourage these events to take place in the community?
It was more or less kind of an in-kind support to some of these events rather than the ask. We could say here are some more amenities that we would be willing to, but certainly to factor in a cost recovery or a rental fee, that's something that could be considered.
Thank you. And then Andrew, Eastview Park seating improvements?
Again.
So again, this is basically to have a look at the center hedge feature around the middle of that park that's got, it's kind of a sheltered area that seems to attract a bunch of people at all hours of the day and night. The hedge is a little bit overgrown and there's a complete buffer in there. We've had some comments from the public that you know, as they're walking along the waterfront walkway and they hit that little alcove, they can sometimes get startled by some of the activities that were going on in there. So the idea was to remove that hedge, which is kind of overgrown and beyond its best before date, lift it up a little bit, put a little bit different of a planting feature in there, and open it up so there was a little bit more of a clarity as to what goes on in that little area in the park. So it was a chance to enhance some of the planting features around that little feature in there, and just to improve the look and make it a little bit more open than what's there right now.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I know from the tour of the work yard to staff, the shop hoist was something you were looking to be able to do some some maintenance as opposed to contracting maintenance work out. Is that correct on vehicles?
Actually, it's the replacement of our automotive hoist that we have in the shop right now. The existing one's about 20 years old. There's some rust and some scaling starting to show up on it, so the staff and mechanics have been worried about the integrity of it. They had an inspector come in and look at it, and he figures it's got a couple of years of life left in it. But certainly it's on the docket to be replaced sooner than later.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, the First Street sidewalk, what span would that cover? That's new sidewalk on the west side. What span would that cover?
Yeah, through the chair. It's about a 70-meter stretch from the intersection of 2nd and 1st. On the west side of the street, there's just one little gap there. Certainly we've done some significant improvements to 1st Street over the last few years, and there's just a little gap there. There's some sightline issues in the area there that we felt there was worthwhile to do that little bit of an infill project. Not with the bricklock pavers that we've used, but just a standard concrete sidewalk. And the sidewalk, as it comes from Sydney and heads towards the ferry terminal, it does stop about halfway along that area. Again, that's more of a like than a must-have, but certainly we can improve the visibility and make that intersection a little bit safer for crossings, probably within our regular operating budgets.
So in that area, going from 1st and 2nd, working up towards in town, it would go all the way to where the town public path is through the neighborhood there, or towards the old Boondocks property?
Yeah, through the chair, just beyond there, the large condominium development that just got finished, that's probably the area where the sidewalk on the west side stops. So it's kind of a mid-block thing. Certainly there's continuity through town on the east side all the way there, but it was, again, it's getting such a popular walk even from people coming from the ferry terminal. We thought that to have the sidewalk completed on both sides did kind of make sense. Certainly when those last two projects, the old Boondock site and the Co-op gas station, once they get finished, we'll be getting some amenities from those developments on the sidewalks in that area. That would complete that link pretty much completely through that part of the downtown area and that entranceway into town.
Okay, as supplemental, has there been input from the residents, particularly the large condo building on that west side?
There has been a little bit of desire to see that link completed, but it certainly hasn't been a groundswell or a petition or anything like that. But certainly park staff with conversations with the neighbors, they see that there is some value in completing that link.
Okay, thank you. I have a different question through the chair. The Galleran sidewalk, so on Galleran, I think was budgeted at $300,000 for 2019, and that's under consideration with a staff recommendation to postpone.
It was, it's actually 350, and there was a staff report that came forward late last year, and the staff did recommend that at that time postponing it till later, but council wanted to have a report back on maybe an interim measure that could be put in place, or to go out to the community, and there is a set community consultation being planned for next month, I believe.
That's correct. Yeah, we're looking at organized community engagement in I believe in March sometime. So that's being organized currently to receive some to present some of the options to the community and receive some feedback before council makes a decision.
Thank you. Through the chair. So as the audience may be aware, it discussed at a previous council meeting, and we've since had follow-up staff report, there are challenges with the engineering as originally conceived for this Galleran sidewalk on the west side, and council moved to conduct some public engagement on that. But in terms of the impact on the budget, if the community was accepting of a partial solution at this stage because of what's coming down in a few years, then it could, for example, if we spent 150 instead of 300, be a significant reduction in the budget, like a percent or. or so.
I just wanted to, I guess, make an observation. And I'm not recommending that we do this, but I'm rather putting it out there that we have this kind of possibility if we want. The shop hoist, staff have said they expect they're going to have to replace it. Has some life left, but they expect they're going to have to replace it in a couple of years. That opens the possibility to we put half the money aside and they buy the hoist next year. No, I appreciate that is simply transferring some increase from this year to next year, but sometimes that makes it more palatable because you wind up with more modest increases rather than one big one. So again, I'm not suggesting we necessarily do that, but that's one of the options that council has.
Two things, if I may, to answer the mayor's question about Galeran. It could potentially reduce the impact in a roundabout way because it's currently not tax funded. So what you could do though, because it's, I believe the general capital reserve, you can take that and allocate it to something that is tax funded, and that's how you would see a tax. But then you have to make that money up later when the project eventually comes back for reconsideration. The other point is on the tax-funded capital, if you look on page 77 and 8 of your binders, it shows the tax-funded capital for the entire 5-year time frame. So we have more in year 2 and 3 than we have for year 1. And believe me, when we started this process back in when I started taming that lion back in December, we were over $1 million in year 1. So we've managed to defer some of the tax-funded projects over the 5-year time span, but we're still pretty oversubscribed for years 2 and 3. So whatever you defer now will go into year 2, and then we'll have more deferrals down the line as we try and balance it out.
So to be correct, or that if, for example, the community was accepting of an interim solution that saved $200,000 this year, that since we're going to do that sidewalk in the future, it would be better to set it aside in a reserve anyway, rather than going ahead and allocating it to a tax-funded.
If you wanted to take a longer-term view, I would suggest that, yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I'm looking at this, the list, having heard Brian regarding Eastview Park seating, if we were to do a shrub clearing so that the safety concerns were dealt with and leave the seating for another year, that would, I mean, we're talking small amount as opposed to $200,000 or $300,000 chunk, but it still is something. On that one, for information for the rest of council who may not be aware, the Hydrobox revitalization, those are those skins, the wraps that they're putting on. There has been a conversation. We're looking at First Nations art. I believe that's a big portion of what was proposed here for 2019. On the First Street sidewalk, my input there is I had a very interesting experience. I went for a walkabout with a young woman in a wheelchair, and she was just showing me what life is like in Sydney from her perspective. And so we went to different places and just even looking at the different types of sidewalks and the cutouts, how that impacted her on in the wheelchair. When we came down First Street, we were on the east side of the sidewalk at Ocean Spray Park, and she went across the sidewalk over to that corner, which is where the extension of the sidewalk is being proposed here. And she said when she's in a wheelchair, she can't see between the cars that are parked on the west side of First Street. Part of it is a residential issue. I think there's that's a resident's hedge that's growing there on the one side. She can't see. I mean, if we're standing and we're over 5 feet tall, we can see if there's oncoming traffic. For her in a chair, that changed the dynamics incredibly so. So something needs to be done, even if we decide we're not going to approve the sidewalk in this particular budget. I think we still need to address that particular section right there to ensure that more members of our community are able to move about safely. Then I'm just going to bump up back to the tax-funded projects. The decorative street lighting at 30,000. It just seems a little hard to rationalize decorative street lighting when we're looking at some bigger ticket items. If we were to postpone this, I know that this is in a progressive plan to work our way through. If we were to drop this out for this year, what happens to that particular project?
We do have a $30,000 annual budget. I believe we have 2 lights that the funding might be earmarked for this year, so we have a legitimate use for about half that funding, and the rest would be opportunity funding should some development project come up in the downtown area. I'll let Brian speak to the criticality of those 2 projects, or maybe Bruce.
Yeah, through the chair, this year for the decorative street lighting, we've identified the replacement of 2 street lights at the bottom of Bevan Avenue, just before the intersection to Eastview Park or Eastview Drive. The condo building there, the sidewalk on the north side has 2 old blue ornamental lights. The bases on those are in quite bad shape from an integrity perspective. So the idea was to replace those with the new ornamental street lights that we usually use. They are getting fatigued. The metal fatigue on the bases and that are significant. It's survived the windstorm from before Christmas, so maybe it's not in that bad shape. We could maybe stretch it out another year, but we certainly did have those 2 in mind. The other thing is that anytime some development comes along and there may be a gap where we can't get the developer to fund, but we could use an infill of a decorative street light. This is where these funds come in handy to do that, so we get some continuity with the decorative street lighting in the downtown core.
Okay, I appreciate that information. So for me then it's semantics. I guess it's the term decorative. It puts it into a much more negotiable place than if you're talking about replacing aging infrastructure, or you're looking at putting in a light, and that becomes a safety issue as well. So that changes things for me, so I appreciate knowing that. Thank you.
Noted.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Along similar lines, if it's regular street lighting, why are we using the term decorative?
It's just a legacy term, like downtown beautification. I
Okay,
think
but this is regular street lighting, is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah, correct.
It's a
thank you.
budget that's been here longer than I have, so it's just carried forward. Sorry, just to take the focus off tax funding for one moment. On page 79 of your binder, you've got a listing of gas tax funded projects. While some of these we've made commitments to, it's not to say that council can't redirect some of this funding to another eligible project. In terms of commitments, we've got the CSB. I wouldn't recommend changing that, and we have the downtown employee parking lot, which is in progress. Beyond that, though, we have a couple of larger projects that have been priorities in the past, and I'm not sure if they remain priorities for this new council. Things like the bike path on the west side of the highway, that did come out of the west side LAP. It is something that we plan on carrying out if the funding isn't moved elsewhere. Things like McDonald Park Road sidewalk, another west side LAP project. You might feel that it should go ahead, but most of these funds are not set in stone. If you have different priorities, they can be moved. as long as it's to an eligible project.
Good.
Thank you for coming back to that. With regards to those two, and I'll speak to the bike path on the west side. I mean, feedback that I heard during the election is many residents in the Galerin neighborhood without sidewalks on Galerin, without curbs in their neighborhood, without a Galerin traffic circle, without a full sidewalk on Beacon West, and having seen all the improvements done over the years on Beacon Avenue and the waterfront, feel that they've been neglected. And I think while we do have to have a town hall to discuss the main sidewalk, I think I would like to see the bike path go forward, because they do use that as a commute, if you will, to come into Sydney. With regards to the McDonald Park Road sidewalk, question through to staff again. What stretch of McDonald Park Road might that be?
That is on the east side of McDonald Park Road between Henry and Mills Road. South of Mills.
So this is new sidewalk?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Councillor Fallon and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad the mayor just picked up on the bike path on the west side of the highway. Heard far too long from people in that area saying that, you know, everything's happening in the downtown core. And so I think for me that's an important voice that I want to pay attention to. I'm gonna look at Tallista Park sidewalk. I know that project was slated to be in this year's budget, and because some things changed and cost of the project changed significantly, and it's put into 2020. I was just walking through the other day, and I noticed that there are a number of cracks. Is there anything that we can do in the interim as far as either filling in those cracks? There's a lot of unevenness in it, and I'm concerned with tripping. Can we at least paint them? Is there something we can do to just make it a little bit easier before we get into 2020?
Through the chair, certainly we look at that. As you walk along that area, you'll see that we've taken our planer and we've ground down those edges.
Yes, I noticed that.
It's a continuing problem with the poplar trees that are in the area there, and that's the difficulty with the design there was to get the walkability of the sidewalk, and how do you save the trees or retain them. It's a bit of a balance, so that's why we wanted to take the extra year for the sober second thought. But certainly we can deal with those trip hazards as part of our regular routine maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Beg your pardon, sorry. Andrew,
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Garnett first.
Just sort of going to concur with the mayor and Councillor Fallon. That bike path is an integral part of that side of the highways community, especially for the children as they walk into Sydney, see it regularly, and families, everybody pretty much, because as you stated, it is really their sidewalk, because Galeron's not safe for them to really walk upon. So, and as far as the sidewalk, at that part of McDonald Park Road, that is also a very big safety issue, as I work right in that area and I see how desperately that is needed. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you. To staff, the downtown employee parking lot, I'm assuming that's the paving, sort of the curbing, etc., for the Mary Winspear Center lot?
Yeah, the paving remains, and a little bit of the landscaping work and lighting, but that was the estimated carry forward for completion. I think it'll be less than that for 2019.
The 390. Okay.
The whole project was 1.3 million.
Thank you.
So the point of showing you this is that it's not just the tax funded. You can choose to allocate other funding. And it's good to reconfirm that what we already have in there is still a priority for council.
Go ahead.
Apart from the sidewalks that we've discussed, the larger ones, there are 6 or 7 other sidewalks or similar improvements in this gas tax funded projects. If I could, I don't know whether it needs to be a motion or not, but make a request to staff that they look at what would be the highest, on a priority basis, where we might cut 50 to 60,000 from those 8 or 9 different improvements, not the large ones that we've discussed, but those others, and if that could be brought forward at the next deliberations.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no additional questions or motions about capital, I'm ready to wrap this up for.
If I may just make a similar suggestion to that the mayor made with respect to the screen you've got there.
Okay.
So you mentioned checking on the RCMP cell blocks, because I'd be happy to see that removed. I'd also be happy to see event tents and chairs removed. And as I believe Councillor Follett commented, perhaps there's an opportunity to decrease Eastview Park improvements from 10 to 5K. So if staff wanted to comment on that prior to us having a motion at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other requests for staff to comment on? No? Go ahead.
Just to confirm that I had made the mention with the First Street sidewalk, west side, to deal with the safety issue, and I think that was it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that's a request to look at an option that would address the safety issue but not be the full 70K?
So was that First Street or Talista? I believe you were.
No, I was first.
That was on the gas
First
tax?
Street was
First
to look at
Street
not
sidewalk,
First
west
Street
side.
sidewalk,
Okay.
west side,
Okay.
is to look at just creating visually a site improvement for people who couldn't look out beyond. There's a hedge there, and I'm looking at not putting a sidewalk on that one. And as far as Talista, I believe Brian picked up on that I was at least looking for this year just to make sure that the bumps and were highlighted, were painted.
Okay.
Through the chair to Councillor Follett, I certainly believe we could remove that vegetation and that sightline issues just with a knock on the door to the development there, just to let them know we've got some safety concerns on the planting that's within the road allowance, and I'm certain that we'd be able to rectify that fairly quickly.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what happens from here? We're going to take all your comments, questions, and direction and work it into another set of staff reports, and I'd like to say a new draft budget, but nothing so far has changed, so it'll be coming back with potential changes, but nothing approved per se, other than I can't remember about utilities anymore. Are we going to leave that for now? Okay.
You're bringing the slides.
Right, okay. So the idea is to get it done on the 26th. We've got a couple of meetings between here and then if you have any other questions or ideas for additional investigation. We can certainly hear from the public tonight as well as at subsequent meetings. So once it is approved on either on the 26th or at a subsequent meeting, should you choose to make it go a little bit longer, that budget will be the basis upon which the tax rates are set, and we'll follow up with a financial plan bylaw in April. So does council wish to have another round as to the preferred overall tax increase, or just leave it alone for now?
I was going to comment that I think I would be trying to get it to 5%, and if we can do more than that, great, but I'm not realistically seeing it going below 4.5, just because there are too many fixed items that, like the employer health tax, that we can't do anything about. And if somebody's looking for something more aggressive, please say so.
Yeah, if I can, I concur. It would not be an easy task to Councillor Duncan's points and to yours, Councillor Wainwright. I agree. I would like to maybe look at how we can defer a couple of these undertakings to try and keep this to 4% would be sort of the line of thinking that I'm moving forward with. Thank you.
Go ahead.
4% sounds good to me.
3.95? Okay.
Okay. That looks like we're done with your presentation. Thank you. We'll look forward to the follow-up on the various items we've asked from staff. Coming back to our agenda, we're now on the public participation period. Members of the audience have heard all this wonderful discussion. Does anyone want to ask any questions about the presentations, offer some comments? I'm expecting at least a couple. And your name and address, sir.
Good evening, Council. Steve Duck, 9805 2nd Street, Sydney. I first want to thank Andrew for a great presentation on the budget and certainly for the Economic Development Fund. And that's where I'm going to direct my comments tonight, and I especially thank each of the council members that brought some very detailed questions to the floor through the 5 presentations we've had over the last couple of meetings. And specifically, it was indicated and supported by questions from council about the duplication of effort that's happening through multiple organizations that are seeking funds from the Economic Development Fund. And I'm hoping that, with things like the website and job board and the maps and things, there seems to be that duplication and almost overlap of different activities. And to my view, I'm not a professional in any way by economic development. I'm seeing a lot of programs that are coming forward that look like window dressing. And I look at that and say, at the past work of the Economic Development Committee, and they did a lot of the, what I would call unsexy work of just getting down and grinding out what are the critical factors to our economic development. And I would really encourage you to seek the support of your colleagues in Central Saanich and North Saanich to look at a much more peninsula-wide economic development theory, and certainly then within Sydney. The work that the EDC did, I know that you're reviewing that committee and its terms of reference. Is there not a place for a committee or similar group of people to be brought together, the representatives that were on the EDC, in fact, were many of the presenters in the past 5 of those presentations, to work together to get some sort of cohesion and collaboration on those efforts so that we're not seeing a duplication of efforts. That funding that you're looking at potentially distributing from the Economic Development Fund, could it not be overseen by that group, be it an Economic Development Committee or similar, that would then, much like SEAG is doing, manage the economic development so it's not duplicated in multiple ends and that sort of thing. And also, it was noted by council as to the measurable results. And although be it footsteps on the street are great, we need much more concrete measurements than that to show economic development. And I think the work that the EDC did was starting to lead towards that way. So I would again encourage you, both for Sydney and getting some cooperative and collaborative efforts from those different organizations around the table, as well as your colleagues in Central and North Saanich. Thank you.
I won't ask if there's anyone else. Whoops.
I'm fine, thank you.
Go ahead.
Doug Walker, 2127 Collinwood in Sydney. I run a home-based business. You heard that earlier tonight, and it's a B2B business providing services. I don't need to go any farther into it than that for purposes here. But what I will say is that over the last couple of weeks, you've heard 3 economic development related presentations from 3 very different groups, each with its own perspective. From my opinion, most notably, none of those three groups shares the same perspective you have as the town of Sydney. You have one from within the town of Sydney, and two from outside the town of Sydney. One, the Chamber of Commerce, which has just its 3 municipalities, and then you have SIP. And my advice to you is that you carefully consider and hopefully reactivate the Economic Development Commission, because it is the only one amongst that group of four, if I can add it into the other three, it's the only one of the group that has, by definition, the same geographic mandate that the town of Sydney has. You run the risk of falling into the trap of the biases that come from any of the other three if you choose to somehow outsource your economic development oversight in particular to one of those three groups. I am previously a member of the Economic Development Commission, was up to the point where it went into hiatus last year, and I also declare that I am currently serving as a member and a board member of the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. So having declared that, I still stand behind what I believe to be an unbiased assessment of these four agencies here. So my bottom line advice is I encourage you, use the Economic Development Commission. Those are good-willed people who can help answer some of the questions, such as the one that you posed about why do we have two flat maps? Do we need two flat maps? Just as an example. I think that is a question that this council, the kind of question that this council should be asking the EDC for input on. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Jocelyn Gifford, 10448 Albay Road. I think staff particularly, actually, but council as well, needs to think about needs beyond downtown and the seaside. As I've listened to the proposals coming forward, or that Andrew has listed, and also really I want to express great appreciation to Andrew, because his presentations are always so clear and easy for a real layperson like myself to at least get a good sense of what's being proposed. But all of the proposals for improvement, for capital funds, for gas tax fund, generally, as I heard them, maybe not all, but most, are in the downtown. Let's put a sidewalk on the west side of First Street. Let's make changes to Eastview Park. Let's put a canopy and chairs on in Beacon Park. There are real safety issues, as Scott keeps bringing up, on Gallerin in that neighborhood, and I didn't hear anything. We had the West Side Local Area Plan, which is great, and some of the things there are in fact coming forward. I live in a neighborhood now. I always hesitate to advocate for that neighborhood because it's Albay Road. But the shore access next to me, the Bowden shore access, has not been, 2 trees were taken down last year, but the barriers for the cars have not been washed, I don't think, certainly not clean, not repainted. I think in the 9 years since I've lived there, I often think I should be writing to staff about this, but I'm doing a bunch of other things instead. My friend who lives on Mills Road talks about the need for basic improvements and maintenance to the park there. I think it's between Mills Road and the, I'm blocking on what the next road is. When I must admit, when I heard that the First Street sidewalk was being considered because the residents there had sort of expressed that it would be nice to have a sidewalk. And staff had been talking to them. In my neighborhood, staff don't seem to stop long enough to talk to them. Unless it's a big, unless it's the big subdivision. So I think, I don't have a clear conclusion, but I think my point is, I hope my point is clear. We need to think about all of Sydney, not just the resources for beautification of Tulista Park and Iroquois Park and sidewalks and more for Eastview Park. And I really am strongly supportive of the revitalization plans for those 3 parks. That consultation process we've just gone through, that's great. That has really involved people. But there are corners, there are shore access, beach accesses, there are little parks throughout Sydney that also really need attention. They don't need big stuff necessarily, but they need, I think the residents who live there would like to think that they are getting the same level of attention as the downtown. So, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not going to try to respond at great length, but I think one thing about the presentation staff made is that was not a complete list of every capital project. Rather, staff were focusing on the projects that are funded out of property taxes this year, as opposed to things being funded out of replacement plans and so on. So for the west side, looking at 2019, there's 19,000 into upgrades of Boulder Park, 132,000 McDonald Park Road sidewalk, 343,000 Galleran sidewalk, 240,000 bike path west side of the highway, and 445,000 for infrastructure plan, McDonald Park Fire Lane number 2 to the Pat Bay Highway. That's a little over $1 million on the west side. So I don't think that was made clear in the staff presentation, but there really is some recognition of the need to do upgrades in the West Sydney area. And the West Side Local Area Plan gave us kind of a template of priorities and things we should be looking at. Anyone else wanting to comment or ask questions?
I'm back. A quick comment. I do applaud you. When I was working, I used to defend a budget of about $25 million every year in front of a board of directors, and we got it all done in about 2 hours. And the Spanish Inquisition was nothing like you guys have put poor old Andrew through here, you know. So good stuff. A couple of quick comments. First of all, let's just go back to First Street and that sidewalk. In the time of the last council, actually when the sidewalk was done in interlocking brick on the opposite side, total waste of money. I raised the question with council at that time, or a councillor at that time, who promptly told me that the people who live along there, number one, built their residences in full knowledge that there was no sidewalk. And in fact, one of the residents along there who happens to be a friend of mine, lived along that section, and who told me that you don't mention that because we don't want a sidewalk along there. So that's a very good place. But to address Councillor Fallett's concern, yes, there is a concern there, even for people who are not in wheelchairs. Cars particularly, you're out on that sidewalk, on that crosswalk, and there's no chance of a car seeing you if they move along there. So there's an instance, $70,000 that isn't necessary. Let's put it that way. The other comment before I come, excuse me, to my main point, which Steve's mainly done, the OCP review. I do applaud the thought that $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but hopefully we're going to do this right. This is probably going to be the keynote thing for this council. I've heard, thanks to Sydney Radio, there was some comments about how Colwood did it and how they did it to some extent right by going out, not holding open houses, but actually going out and meeting people where they are, and getting information. And, you know, for example, I remember they rented a bouncy house and put it at a school so they could talk to people, you know, as they got their kids from a school. It takes that sort of effort to get really good input, and that's not going to be inexpensive, and it's not going to be some consultant or whatever. So don't be too cheap on that OCP. It's your flagship. Quick comment, there's going to be all sorts of demands, as there are on budget. We're going to have to, or you're going to have to decide what comes and goes. Some of it will be urgent demand. And you look at the Shore Centre for the Saanich Sea, they've come up with some really good, solid information these days. And that brings me to my main point, which is the Economic Development Fund. Obviously dear to my heart. I'd like to think that if I look on the town's website, the EDC provided, yes, some really good background information. You can go on that website, you can find things about demographics, you can have the whole of the SBIA area, for example, broken down by types of business, by NAICS code, by area usage, by land usage, same thing for the west side. There is a way to approach economic development. It's laid out in the BC Economic Development Association plan for how you bring one of those in. I think the EDC made a very good start on that. And I do appreciate Doug's comments about what was done in the EDC. Effectively, if you approve what's done here, you'll eliminate the EDC because there's no money for an EDC anymore. You're down to, you know, a deficit number. And it includes, and fine, the SBIA, it's a good presentation. Some of the things they've suggested, like a website, for example, absolutely, we're in the work plan for the EDC. That was there. It goes back, I could probably pull out the minutes. The idea was to compile all the information on the town's website and then move it over to a satellite website at that time once it was all put together. For sure, you know, but none of that stuff cost a lot of money. Everything that was done by the EDC up until the time I left about 10 months ago was done on an average budget, I would say, of $5,000. It was also done with 40 hours a week from several volunteers, but volunteers are important and I think valuable. So I'd look at that. I think, you know, when you look at it, you know, SIP, I actually went, they're very proud of their, you know, their achievement in you know, their city award. I actually was the person who went to the inaugural meeting of that. My experience in SIP was that, quite honestly, we would ask them for information. It was a one-way street. They'd come and see us once a year. They'd make similar presentation to what you just saw. It did nothing for Sydney. That's only my own comment. If you're going to renew it, why not just, you've got 2 more years at the same funding level. All right, maybe they just have to come up with some real solid deliverables. I did appreciate Councillor Wainwright's comment that, yes, they are deliverables. And I go back to my time defending that budget at a board meeting. The deliverables that I defended were written in stone, and you'd better do them. And that was what you were assessed against. And again, if I look at the SBIA and to some extent the Chamber of Commerce, where's the hard deliverables in this? I'm not seeing them. And I think, you know, $136,000, if we approve this, is going to go to the SBIA in 2019. Some of it's already committed, but you've eliminated the EDC. I like Doug's idea that maybe in some format, this commission or this select committee to look at what succeeds the EDC comes up with a body which harmonizes all of these overlaps, which brings things together and perhaps funds projects, perhaps single things that come either from the BIA or indeed from the Chamber. They've got some great ideas, but let's break it down and make sure we're not overlapping. We've got a great opportunity now that the West Side Industrial Group has joined the Chamber. And if I look at this here, poor old Chamber, year 2, they might know, don't bother coming back because there's already a negative. All right, and I will say this, when I was on the EDC, and Denny was there as well, we had good support from the Chamber in terms of information and in fact in terms of manpower. So just my comments. Thank you very much for all your efforts.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to comment or ask questions? Okay.
Well, back again, but wearing a different hat as the president of the Sydney Community Association. And speaking of economic development, we all know, and it's driven by businesses, and certainly there was 3 presentations from business organizations on that economic development. But I want to remind you that economic development is not just for businesses, it's for the community. And to that end, the Sydney Community Association, in conjunction with Radio Sydney, are hosting the first of the OCP education sessions we wish to do leading up to the presentation of the OCP. And this one in particular is on economic development and looking at having a panel discuss and the applications to the community as well as the business. So that's happening on Sunday. And I think it's just a reminder that economic development is for the community, not just for the business. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that one was not particularly about the budget tonight, but any other questions or comments? Seeing none, that completes our agenda. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. No.